T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good.
You ready for do more in the future? Trap Talk podcasts?
Yes.
Man.
Only Trap Talk. Exclusive.
Yes.
Exclusive. Oh.
So stop calling us.
Rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the crop, gotta love it or not. I'm hot from the hop to the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with everybody, we do it. Everybody, we do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with the rub the spot, get the club to pop. When I come up with
Here we go. You are now tapped into the coolest reptile podcast in the world. I'm your boy MJ. What is good? If this is your first time tapping into your boy, favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. That way you're on top of every single podcast that I drop here on the Trap Talk with MJ podcast channel, man. But what is good, everybody? Is everyone as excited as I am for tonight's episode? Fuck. Can't believe this is happening. But guys, also, I do want to say shout out to everyone else who listens on the audio platforms, you know, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Buzzsprout. I got to say, I have heavy numbers from what I'm seeing on those platforms. So I just want to give those people a shout out. If you listen to me, if you listen to this podcast and the guests on those platforms, don't forget to actually rate, review, and subscribe to those as well. But I do appreciate anyone who listens to this podcast on any platform. It means a lot. And then, yeah, like I said, shout out to the early birds. I'll get to you guys here in just a second. But you guys know how we start these things off here at this podcast. For the freshest and bestest rodents delivered to your doorstep, Cold Blooded Cafe is the way to go. $30 flat rate shipping, day one pinks, mammoth rats to your doorstep. All those options. Check them out. They're the number one in the game. Shout out to Desiree. Shout out to Steven. Love you guys. Shout out to John and Alex over at Sim Container. If you have eggs, put them inside of a sim box. Telling you right now, less steps, less stress. If it's a sim, it's a win. Shout out to John, shout out to Alex for creating such a nifty convention and such an amazing, way to hatch out your eggs. I'm telling you right now, got to go with the sim container. Thank you so much, John and Alex. They also have an amazing monitor program that you guys should check out as well. So go check them out on Instagram. Definitely doing big things. My inspiration when it comes to monitors, 110%. And then shout out to Steven and Ashley over at Focus Cube Habitats, grinding, just killing it. Man, they're slaying away. Dead ass serious. I talked to them briefly today. They gave me a heads up on my order. Very excited. And yeah, just be ready because I will be, displaying what's to come. But for now, you guys go check them out on Instagram and go to their website. Go see what they have. They are doing shit custom, all PVC built in Flexing, Texas, all day, every day. Thank you guys so much for your support. It means a lot. And then the number one stainless steel rack company in the United States, if not the world, that's going to be Freedom Breeder. You can't beat Freedom Breeder. If you have a Freedom Breeder, you already know what the deal is. Professional snake breeding or rat breeding, either way, mouse, whatever, it doesn't matter. fucking stainless steel racks that are the number one. That's Freedom Breeder, man. Shout out to Jesse. Shout out to the entire Freedom Breeder crew for leading the industry for since the 90s. Gotta love it. And honestly, just killing it since coming into the game. Ever since me coming into the ball pythons, this guy's been my number one inspiration, hands down. My boy Miguel Garcia, big bro, always evolving pythons. Shout out to the whole entire AEP family. Thank you so much for all your guys' support. Really means a lot. People like this who support me is why I feel like no matter what the majority of people think of me, as long as I have people like this who have my back, I feel like I could go a long ways. And I really mean that. Thank you, Miguel. I appreciate all your support, big dog. Talk to you soon. And guys, if you're into ball pythons, if you're looking to expand your ball pythons or just add more different shit, I'm telling you, this is your guy you want to check out. He's doing things differently. Nobody's on this guy's level. He's doing his own thing. And that's my big dog, Miguel Garcia. And then talking about being on his own level, this is my dog right here for sure. My boy, Alan from Amazing Basins. Please go check him out on Instagram. This guy is a shoo-in. Telling you right now, not everyone on this earth is meant to work with these beautiful basins, let alone breed them. This guy does both, okay? If you are interested in learning more about the basins, or if you already know about them and you want to know what's good with my boy Alan, then go to Instagram right now. Give him a follow. Amazing Basins. On top of that, my man is getting heavy into the ball python game. He's breeding some ball python stuff that he's slowly starting to expose on his Instagram as well. So another heavy reason to go check out my man Alan. I have a good feeling about my man's this year. He's yet to come on Trap Talk, which he's already been on Unfiltered, so go check that episode out. But we do have something scheduled in the future to have my boy Alan on, and it's going to be heavy. Just be ready. Alan, thank you for your support. It means a lot. And then shout out to my boy Blake Stewart at Stewart Design, definitely changing the game by the day. This is my boy right here that is doing big things with people's brands, marketing, taking them to a whole nother level. If you out there want to invest more into yourself, if you are looking to do this reptile thing for a full time, or if you even have your own business or your own company and you feel like your marketing's not there, if you've never invested in your marketing, you got some good coin that you want to invest, there you go. Invest in yourself. Go to Stewart Design, talk to my boy Blake, let him know MJ from Trap Talk sent you. Excuse me. And yeah. Dude, that's serious. This guy is doing big things, not only for breeders, but US ARC, who's helping the breeders, all sorts of amazing things going on at Stewart Design. Appreciate your support, Blake. Really means a lot. And then shout out to my boy Rami, throws the #1 show on the West Coast. That's the Reptile Super Show. I appreciate this guy so much. Takes care of me and all my homies, all the trappers, whenever I roll up to the show. And I'm telling you, this guy has just been doing big things for this hobby by throwing these shows for I don't know how many years now, man. I mean, I do know, but I just can't think about him. Super ripped. But Rami, I appreciate your support so much. Seriously, guys, go to a Reptile Super Show any chance you get, especially if you live on the West Coast. Make that a priority. That's where you connect. That's where you meet people, and that's how you really grow in this industry. And then if you've never been to an NARBC and you've been to a Reptile Super Show, you got to make it to an NARBC. That's a whole nother level by itself, okay? The gentleman that I'm about to have on the show, I was able to meet at an NARBC. And I'm telling you, that's why you want to go to places like TINLEY and Arlington. You never know who you're going to run into. And yes, plenty of big stories, plenty of legendary moments at NARBCs and Reptile Super Show. I want to say thank you, Bob Ashley, Brian Potter, for everything that you guys do. You guys are a huge inspiration, but to not only me, but to anyone who vends and everyone who fucking wants to throw shows. So shout out to all those guys right there, amazing leaders in the industry. Without them, without these shows, I feel like we would be fucked. I really feel like that. I'm dead serious. I love the shows, man. Without the connection, you know, as a lot of you guys can live off the social media connection. I can't. I need the face-to-face. I'm fucking, you know what I mean? Fuck. I don't know. That's all I can think of. Thank you guys for throwing the shows. And then shout out to Phil Goss, US ARC. Let's go, man. This is the man who's literally going to battle and fighting for our animal rights. He is fucking taking a damn samurai to these legislations and saying, no, fuck that. You're not taking our animals. Who wouldn't want to support something like that? If you really love your animals, you're going to want to go down to the link, click on US ARC, become a member, and help us fight, please. By the way, any questions that you have for my man, Greg Maxwell, tonight, live super chats, right? You could see, you could donate a super chat. If you donate that super chat, I send any super chat over to US ARC, okay? So don't be shy. Don't be broke. I'm just kidding. If you're broke, I understand that. I didn't mean that. I've been broke. But I'm just saying, let's go. Let's get these fucking super chats going from my man, Greg Maxwell. And then before we wrap this up, if you guys want to see what I'm working with, if you want to see what my passions are other than the whole podcasting gig, go to my Instagram, mjexoticscartal. Go give me a follow, because on that Instagram, on that page is where you can find all my projects. And, I'm very active on Instagram. So if you ever want to get a hold of me and whatnot, Instagram's the way to go. mjexoticscartal with an A, not an E. And then follow the podcast's Instagram page as well. Trap Talk with MJ Podcast. Twitch, I see my viewers going up on Twitch. I appreciate you guys so much. If you have Twitch, please go give me a follow on Twitch. And then, like I said, if you would like to support this channel more than anything than a like or a subscription or a comment, I appreciate all that. You can send me any donation you like to Exoticscartal with an A, not an E, straight over to PayPal. And I appreciate it. Drop a note. And much love to that. And then my heart, my family, my soul, my trap family. That's my Patreon member right there. My Patreon members, if you want to join a sick-ass community, a sick-ass Patreon group of members that are growing by the day, sick-ass OGs and new people in the game, go down to the link below, click on the Trap Talk Patreon community link, and join the Trap Talk Patreon family today, man. Shout out to my Patreon families members. I appreciate you guys so much. And then, if you guys actually want to get your hands on some sick-ass Trap Talk with MJ merch, I do have some of these shirts left. So get at me for a classic fucking pocket tee, Trap Talk with MJ, Trapping is a Sport t-shirt, okay? You can either send me an email or just hit me up on Instagram, and then, I can let you know how to get one. But what's up with all the early birds, man? I see early birds up in the comments. Woo, who's here? Jake Cole, what is good, Jake Cole? Thanks for tapping in. Trap Talk, Patreon fan member all day, every day. Deviant Glass, what is good, player? Thanks for tapping in. Trap Talk, Patreon fan member all day, every day. Sound Serpents, the homie Sean, Trap Talk, Patreon fan member all day. Chantel, what is good, homegirl? Trap Talk, family member all day. Homie Marlon, what is good, Marlon? Trap Talk family member all day. The homie Jay, Barbara J in the building. Trap Talk family member all day. Eric's More Factory, what is good? The homie Ryan, Trap Talk family member all day. Thanks for tapping in, player. Chad 2, what is good? Thanks for tapping in. Trap Talk family member. Triple G in the building. Team Zoo Dreams, what's good, player? Thanks for tapping in. Railway City going down this Saturday. If you guys want to tap in, international coffee dab session going down with my boy in Canada, Railway City Reptiles. Thanks for tapping in. 702 Serpents in the building. Vegas, what is good? The homie Bruce Carpenter, what is good, player? Thanks for tapping in. Genomic Labs, what's up, player? Thanks for tapping in. Tyler King, what is up, player? Thanks for tapping in. The homie Alan, this is a big dog right here. Thanks for tapping in, Alan. I appreciate you. Amazing feeders for you. Thanks for tapping in. The homie Big Mike, 1776 Exotics, Trap Talk family member all day, every day. Let's see. Kevin, what is good? Thanks for tapping in. The homie, oh, by the way, Trap Talk family member, big time. The homie Matt, Trap Talk La Familia all day, every day. Thanks for tapping in. The homie right here, Christopher Rice. I'm about to call you Christian Stewart. Yet to get him on. Maybe I could, I gotta figure that out. But no, it's a homie Christopher Rice. I had him on the show recently, and I'm gonna end it on Christopher Rice because he's just such a G. Because I am also very excited to get our guest on the show here. Because I don't want to waste no more time. I didn't expect this to happen. Can you believe this shit? This guy right here, the man who has written this book and in other books, but this is the book right here that changed my life. I'll tell you that right now. No, these aren't my original notes. My dad has my original book. He jacked it from me, but I was lucky enough to cop 3 more of these books, gave them away to certain special people, and then was able to keep one for myself. So I was able to read it again prior to this show, and it's going to go down. So without further ado, the man of the best-selling manual for green tree python keepers, I have for you, Greg Maxwell. What's up, Greg?
How's it going, MJ?
How goes it, my man?
Excellent. Thank you.
How are things in Ohio?
Well, we're having our 3rd fake spring. So going back to snow flurries tomorrow, with 70 yesterday, but we'll get there.
I mean, Greg, you've been in Ohio for how long now?
Well, I was born and raised in Ohio,
okay,
and I'm 64. So other than a 5-year hiatus in Kansas City, I've been here my whole life.
Okay, respect. So born and raised. I mean, because I gotta say, I've been in places of the United States, even lived where I'm in San Diego, so we don't get seasons, right? But I've been to places where I felt seasons, and that cold drop. You have to be from there to actually be prepared for something that cold when it happens, because it could just, I don't know, man. I don't know how you do it. Hats off to you.
It can be painful.
It could be painful. But listen, Greg, I got to say, this is an honor. Thank you for coming on the show. I've heard your name amongst so many other people's names where all I could do is just grasp on the stories on what I hear when I hear your names. But I'm comparing your name with other names where I felt like I would never get these people on the show. So to have you on here, thank you. This is going to be amazing. I appreciate it. But where you been? What's life been like lately with Greg Maxwell for the last 15 whatever years?
Well, like I said, I was in Kansas City for 5 years.
Okay.
How and why I moved out there is another story, but I went to school to learn how to build and repair guitars after I got out of breeding green tree pythons full time. That was in 2010.
Okay.
And played guitar since high school. I've been a lifetime woodworker and furniture maker. And some may remember the Reptile cage company I used to own, Cage Master.
Yeah.
And transitioned from that into green tree. So it's been a whole, journey. But went to school in 2010 to learn how to build and repair guitars. I thought it would be a nice, relaxing, easy transition from the hubbub of the cage company and green trees and, constantly dealing with animals and people and everything. And as it turns out, it's a very rewarding occupation, but pushed my buttons as a craftsman to a whole new level. It's the most difficult thing I've ever done, building high-end acoustic guitars. But I've been doing that now for 12 years full time, and keeping super busy at it. And as anybody that runs a small business knows, you're never done. It's 7 days a week. You lay in bed at night thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow and planning for next month and next year and all that. So other than a few hobbies I have, right, I like to ride motorcycles, like to camp and fish. But other than that, it's pretty much just been work.
Wow. Okay. What stands out to me is how you from what I understand, you really mastered this craft of learning how to rebuild these guitars after the Chondros, correct?
Yeah. Like I said, I've been a lifelong woodworker and furniture maker. So I went to school for guitar building and repair, and it's really two separate businesses, although they function together. Repair really pays most of the bills, and I build one or two custom commissions a year as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right. So, Greg, for me, I need to know, because I geeked out just with the pictures in your book. I'm not going to lie. I'm not really the best reader. I like to read. I'm not going to say I don't know how to read. Don't fuck whoever's trying to laugh out there. I can read. But what really helped me really be interested to keep reading were the documentation photos that you have in your book. You know what I'm saying? Like, because this is like pre any social media platform we're talking about. We're talking about like where, I've heard stories of people inquiring an animal. They had to pay for photos get sent to them, and they had to look at the photos and then kind of see which ones they wanted to pick based off a damn Polaroid. You know what I'm saying? So,
right.
I mean, let's go back to as far as your first step into the Chondro game and how this even happened. I'm just curious, and if you could give us like a circa, the circa around that when that was happening and whatnot.
Sure. Well, I started Cage Master, I think, in 1991. I went to my first reptile show in Columbus, Ohio, in about that year, 1991 or so. It's a monthly show that's still going on. It's one of the first, if not the first, local reptile shows in the United States, put on by my very good and late friend Don Hamper. And shout out to his wife Robbie and son Shay, who I'm still good friends with, and put on that show every month. And so I was building a collection of colubrids and some other things at the same time we were building the cage company, and that just really kind of exploded overnight. I was building furniture full time. Really didn't expect the cage thing to be more than just some side income, but first month I took some stuff. People said, "Hey, can you bring this size next month?" And then I went the next month with those, and people said, "Hey, can you bring me 20?" And the next thing I know, I bought a box truck, went national. We did the National Breeders Expo, which was in Orlando at the time. It's in Daytona now. In 1993, and in 1993, I was introduced to a guy by the name of Trooper Walsh. who was the real green tree python pioneer in the United States, along with his partner Eugene Bissett. And they had a big display of baby chondros that they had offered for sale. And I kept going by the table and was just fascinated. I'd seen pictures of baby green trees and a few adults and things, but never really had paid that much attention to them live.
What year was this, Greg? I'm sorry. What year was this again when you saw Trooper Walsh and Eugene? 93. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
93, yeah. And so one of the benefits of having a successful reptile cage business is that I was at all the shows and always had a giant wad of cash in my pocket. Because we would sell out. We would take a 16-foot box truck to the show, sell out, go back 2 weeks later and meet everybody in the grocery store parking lot with orders and empty a whole nother truck full of cages. At that time, everything was melamine, which was very heavy.
Super heavy.
And so we earned our money, but always had cash on hand. So if I was at a show and wanted to buy snakes, there was really nothing financially to stop me for the most part. And so I came away from that 1993 expo there in Orlando with a handful of jars of baby chondros from Trooper's Table. And then the next month in Richmond, Virginia, there was another show that I was there also as a cage vendor. And Trooper, if anyone knows Trooper or has had the pleasure to be around him, he's a master marketer. You get around Trooper and you just want to give him your money. It's a gift that he has. And he kept walking past the Cage Master table with a glass jar with a yearling female chondro that was just turning green. And he would walk by my table with this jar and go, and then go on back to his table about once an hour. And
I like him.
It was a substantial amount of money. It was way more than I had paid for the babies. I think at that time the babies were $300 or $400 a piece for yellow babies. Okay. And I think this animal was, I don't know, $1,200 or $1,500, which at the time for me was a lot of money to spend on a snake. So I went home from the show without the animal, and Phil Black, a good buddy of mine, some of you know Phil. Phil wrote the foreword. Black. Yeah, Phil wrote the foreword to my second book. We were driving home from Richmond back to Phil's place in Pennsylvania, and we said, we made a big mistake leaving that show without that snake. And as soon as I got home, I called Trooper and made the arrangements to go back down the following weekend and buy it. And that female ended up, if any of you are familiar with my books, her name was Aqua Girl. And I'd like to tell you the story sometime during the podcast of how we got into naming the chondros. It's really kind of an interesting story.
Oh, 100%. I feel like I do. I mean, I feel like some people have a gift with naming their snakes. And we'll definitely get into that for sure. Check that on the box.
But I took her home. And then and then from that point on, I started buying all the chondros that I could afford. A majority of them from Trooper, but a handful from some other people. And again, I aspired to be a hobbyist and a hobby breeder. I never anticipated doing it as a business or full time. Right. But after 5 years in the cage business and all the heavy lifting and the constant travel and I was both the manufacturer and the distributor, which I think in retrospect was a mistake. I think I could have hung in there a lot longer if I'd have done one or the other, but doing both at the same time was quite difficult. And so decided to sell that business in 1996, at the end of 1996. And I thought, what am I going to do now? And I thought, well, why not breed chondros?
How much did you make? I mean, do you mind if I ask you how much did you make selling the business? I mean, what did you earn off that business?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So Phil and I marketed the business, and we wanted to do it anonymously because we didn't want everybody to, Cage Master's going out of business, Right. So we marketed it anonymously in a small magazine at the time called Reptile and Amphibian Magazine. It was published in Pennsylvania. And we got a serious hit off of the ad, and a really nice guy and his wife expressed serious interest. So Phil and I met them for breakfast at one of the shows. We opened up the books, laid everything out, all our cut lists, and really laid out, the costs and the profit margins and everything. And this guy was really excited and indicated that he wanted to buy the business. And he and his wife were going to talk about it some more that evening. And then they were going to come and sign the contract the following day. And I believe it was $125,000 that we had the business listed for, which, again, was a lot of money for me at that time. But, we'd worked hard for 5 years and really built up the brand and the name. And so we came down the following morning to meet with him, and he came out without his wife, looking rather sheepish, and said his wife had talked him out of it overnight and said it just seemed to be too much hard work for the money, and it really wasn't a good fit for them. And as disappointed as I was, I realized that it was a lot of hard work, and I wanted the right person to have it. So that fell through. And we ended up not really getting any other offers for the business until toward the end of that year, 96. And this is kind of a sad ending to the story, but a couple of brothers bought it from me that lived in Jersey. And unfortunately, it didn't end well. They took a lot of deposit money.
I heard about these brothers. I heard about these guys. They came in and did fucking they basically cleaned house on people and they just dipped out, or did a lot of
they
dirt.
Burned a lot of people. And I don't think it was intentional. I don't think they went in to scam everybody, but they didn't really understand how to run the business. And so they took all the deposits for the Daytona show. Then instead of buying the material and manufacturing the product, they lived on it. And then it came time for the show and they didn't have anything. So they just basically cut and run. People showed up to the show from out of state with trailers to pick up their orders and stuff. And they were a no-show. So unfortunately, that didn't end well. But I basically sold it to those guys for what I had left in inventory so that I could walk away without debt. Sold them some equipment and remaining inventory and stuff. So learned some lessons there.
Right. And, it's funny because those kind of lessons haven't left the hobby. That kind of shit still happens. I could tell you that.
Yeah.
Multiple
too
stories.
Bad,
so
yeah.
It makes you who you are in it. I feel like, and you obviously, if you're not that type of person, you want to associate with people like that and you separate yourself. You know what I'm saying? So it's, it's same shit. But I got to ask you, so now that you sold the business, then you said Chondros, based off Trooper Walsh. This is all based off what you got off his table or what you were inspired off his table to make you want to invest in it, correct? That was
for the most part, yeah. About 80% of my animals I had gotten from Trooper, yeah. And so after the cage business, I thought, what next? And I thought, well, heck, why not make a living, breeding green tree pythons? They sell for decent money. I was a glutton for punishment. So launched into that. And
you poor bastard, you didn't know better. No, you think about it. Nobody was there to warn you because nobody knew. It's
right.
Holy shit.
Right.
Well, Trooper knew.
Yeah.
Trooper, okay, but hold on. I don't want to make this about Trooper, but I'm just saying, what did Trooper explain to you as far as did he give you the heads up? Listen, this is how they are when they breed, or was he just as green as where you are when you were doing it? Basically what I'm asking, were these snakes you're buying off Trooper, were they United States captive-born bred, or were these imported snakes that he were getting and selling to you? Or that's what I'm curious.
No, these were strictly 100% captive bred. And that was one of the principles that Trooper instilled in me from the get-go, was how important it was. If you want to be successful with green tree pythons, you need to get captive bred animals and not just farm raised captive bred, so-called, but true domestic captive bred animals that have been well started and, the whole deal. So Trooper never really gave me a whole lot of advice about doing it as a business. I didn't really talk to him that much. He lived in DC. Right. I lived in Ohio. And I would see him at shows. I would buy animals from him. Occasionally, we make trips to his house. But, he was a full-time keeper at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., and that was his main career. So he wasn't selling chondros full time as a business. He was just, doing it for the love of the animals and for auxiliary income, like, most of us when we're in it at, a hobby or semi-professional level.
Right.
So I really kind of forged the business end of it on my own. But by 1996, I had my first pairs going, hatched out my first clutch in 1997. And from 1998 until I got out of it in 2010, I hatched multiple clutches every year. So I was very blessed and fortunate to do that.
Like multiple, like anywhere from like 2 to what? Like what would you say?
My best year was 6 clutches, and I had at least 2. And most years I had 3 to 5 clutches.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Out of maybe a dozen pairs paired up.
So why don't we kind of talk about your experience with your very first clutch? Because I always like to. It's either one or the other. Either it was a walk in the park, or it was like a fucking nightmare.
Right.
What was it? What was it for you? Like, let's just say, like, if you want to explain the first couple of, clutch experiences with the chondros, how was it?
Sure. Well, when I first got into this, artificial incubation of green tree python eggs was considered so difficult as to be almost impossible to get right. And so most people were doing maternal incubation. So my first few clutches were maternal. And as long as you get good fertile eggs and give the female the parameters that she needs, she does all the work. So I did my very first clutch of eggs spoiled. That was in 96. And I think they probably were infertile, or there were at least some slugs in there, and then they got wet and rotted and spoiled the rest. But because the female was wrapped all around them, and I didn't know enough at the time to prod her and open up the coils and check and make sure everything was okay, I just sort of let her do her thing. In my inexperience, that clutch was spoiled. But the following year, I did another maternally incubated clutch and got nearly 100% hatch out of it. And then I launched into the adventures of feeding baby green tree pythons, which is a whole other adventure. Yeah.
Now, real quick, so let's the maternal thing. I feel like a lot of people are kind of like wanting to, not with the necessarily the green trees, even though I do see a couple people doing it, but maternal incubation is where a lot of people feel like they're wanting to either understand or get down. And shout to my boy, one of my biggest mentors and somebody who really motivates me all around in life and in the Chondro games, my good buddy right here, Socrates. And I believe his first clutch back in 2010 was a maternal incubation, and he was literally like hand hydrating her. Like he was like putting droplets in her mouth and keeping her hydrated and whatnot. And I'm just curious, like you have some females that lay eggs either all over the place, want nothing to do with them, or they go and they wrap around them. But both scenarios, eggs could be still good. Like, I've had clutches where, not all of them hatched out, but I was able to get one neonate to hatch out of a clutch where eggs were all over the fucking, the floor. So, I mean, what are you really determining when a female lays, if those eggs are going to be, good or not? You let, obviously, if she does sit on them, you let her sit on them until they go bad, or how are you really determining when those eggs are going to go the distance or not?
Well, I developed, I don't want to make it sound like I invented it, but based off some things Trooper was doing, experimenting with some artificial incubation techniques over water substrate. I started experimenting with that and really came to greatly favor artificial incubation for a number of reasons. But when I was still doing maternal for all my clutches, I basically would just, every week or so, just tease the female a little bit with a snake hook to lift a coil and make sure the eggs still look good. You could open up the cage with the nest box and the female, because that's what I would do, is I would just let her incubate the eggs inside of the cage and regulate the temperature and the humidity inside the cage. But you could smell, and you can instantly smell when eggs are starting to go bad. Wow. Now, when doing artificial incubation, I would candle all the eggs, mark the embryos, and then set them up in the incubator. Real similar, and I'm sure what everybody's doing with ball python eggs now.
Right. Now, that's another thing too, because I mean, twice of my clutches, I think out of 28 eggs, only 2 of them actually were able to hatch, 2 separate clutches, right? So I feel like I and this is my thing too. Like I was thinking, is my incubator wrong? Like what's going on? Like I would see maybe slight fluctuations and think it's the fluctuation. And you have some people who swear by like, yeah, man, if it's not 87 straight or if it's not this and it fluctuates a little, it could definitely have a determination on what's going to happen with the eggs. But then I talked to other people who's have crazy fluctuations and, the eggs do hatch. So, I mean, what were you really, what's your really, your insight with fluctuation temps during incubation, like especially maternal? Like, do you feel like, there's not much airflow going through a maternal incubation, like, artificial, or, I'm just curious what you think about that.
Sure. Well, like I said, with maternal, you give the female the general parameters of temperature and humidity, and she does the rest. Right. We've all observed females, poking their noses down into the eggs, and we assume they're monitoring temperature with their labial pits, but they really do all the work. Artificial incubations come a long way, and I have to say too, back at the time, I wasn't a real experimenter. I was so anxious or anticipatory of getting good results. I just wanted to follow what other people that were successful were doing. I wasn't really looking to, hey, I'm going to pioneer, doing mine in a brick incubator at, whatever temperature and see what happens. I wanted to follow, what I'd seen other people doing. And Trooper and Eugene started off incubating chondro eggs in great big gallon glass jars with pea gravel in the bottom, a little bit of water in the bottom, and then damp sphagnum moss on top of that. Then the eggs on top of the sphagnum moss. They would put a hole in the lid, single hole in the lid with a thermometer probe going down into the eggs. And then they would regulate the humidity by how tight they screwed the lid onto the jar. And they were successfully hatching eggs that way, but Trooper would indicate to me that the margin for error was like near zero. If you didn't get it exactly right, the eggs would spoil. And the first couple of attempts that I made using that method were not successful for me. I think probably because of too much humidity. But yeah, I kind of cut my teeth on the idea that, these things were extremely difficult to incubate. And I think a lot of us discovered that they're really not that difficult. They will successfully hatch given some temperature fluctuations that back in the days were maybe considered, fatal, and they're really not. I'll tell you a quick story. One of my best clutches that I ever hatched, I hatched out after a massive ice storm in Ohio that knocked out power at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I had a backup generator and an emergency panel that powered my whole snake room. But I had to be there to manually start the generator. It wasn't one of those automatic generators. And went out to start it and found out that the guy that mowed my lawn, at the time he was a commercial mower, had run out of gas for his mower and had used up all my gas. And so I couldn't start my generator. And there was about 2 feet of ice and snow. My driveway was a half-mile long. I lived back in the woods. And so I was dead in the water. And I thought, these eggs are gone. There's just no chance. So I had a neighbor up the road with a backhoe. He showed up about 8 in the morning, dug me out, brought me some gas. I got the generator going, got the incubator fired back up. And one of the clutches that was in the incubator at the time hatched out some of my best animals. My female Aya Diablo came out of that clutch. So those eggs were without power for 3 or 4 hours. And I'm sure they cooled well beyond what any of us were ever told chondro eggs could sustain. And yet they still hatched. So I think excess humidity is probably the biggest thing that will take out chondro eggs the quickest, but they will put up with some temperature fluctuations. We always based our artificial incubation temperatures on what the females were doing.
Now, your artificial incubation temps were preferred what? Like, what were you doing artificially wise on your incubation temperatures? Like,
You
did
know,
you
I
ever
have
drop
such a
them up to,
bad
like,
memory. I'd actually have to look up in my own book to remember the exact temperatures, but they were derived from monitoring females that maternally incubated. So they would keep the clutch at a certain temperature for about the first week. Then they would raise it up for the middle weeks of incubation, and then they would lower it slightly in the final week to 10 days. So we emulated that same pattern, and we were working in Celsius. And if memory serves, don't quote me on this, look it up in the book because I have the numbers in there. But I think it was 30.5 or 31.5 was our like middle 5-week temperature, and that's the actual egg surface temperatures. That's not the air temperature.
Right. Now, what I was curious is, like, you know, as far as how much change did you do? I mean, because obviously people learn what worked for them and whatnot. So the method that you were doing incubation wise, was that something you learned and stuck with the entire time, or did you switch things up as you were going along?
I tried several different methods. I've successfully hatched them on vermiculite, successfully hatched using maternal, and then I came to favor a method we called the no-substrate method. Trooper switched away from the gallon jars into this no-substrate method where the eggs were suspended over water in a clear tub with plastic grid like you would have in ceiling lights, like in a factory. It's plastic grid. And we would suspend the eggs over the water in a sealed plastic container and then put that in the incubator, let a temperature probe into the top of the lid of the container and actually touching the eggs. And that's what we would monitor the temperature with. And then we would follow the temperature regimen that the females used when they were maternally incubating the eggs. So certain temperature for the first week, slightly elevated for the middle weeks, then dropping it back toward the end. And toward the end, the eggs will begin to actually generate some heat of their own. They'll begin to dimple in. They'll begin to emit moisture, so you'll get more condensation building up in the hatch container. And you just get used to watching for those things. And after a while, it just really became kind of easy, and it really boiled down to just following the recipe.
I mean, I could tell you one frustration thing that, like, you know, I know I've only had 2 clutches in my experience, right? But both the clutches, the remaining 5 or 4 eggs that were like last, like that made it to day 52, they were fully developed. They were just dead in the egg. Like, and it happened twice, and I was just like, why is this happening? And again, like I said, I've only had 2 clutches, so, you know, I know it's a numbers thing, but how many times is that happening with you? Like, how many times would you have eggs go the distance, either nothing pips, or even times where they do pip and they still die in the egg? Did you run across that a lot?
I wouldn't say a lot, but it certainly happens frequently enough that you were always on pins and needles as, you know, the hatch day arrived. Now, I would always manually pip my eggs. I experienced much less egg death if I manually pipped the eggs. We had animals that you could see where they had cut the shell or attempted to cut the shell in multiple places with their egg tooth and then die in the egg. And so when we started manually pipping eggs, the success rate for full term went way up.
Now, you say manually, meaning like you didn't wait for a pip. You went ahead and just snipped on a certain day.
Right. I think it was like, I don't know, day 48 or 50, something like that. Yeah, I would use a pair of nursing cuticle scissors. My wife is an RN.
Right.
And so she always had a pair of those in her purse, and I swiped a pair. And
nice
I wouldn't cut the whole top off the egg like I see a lot of the ball python egg cutting videos, but I would just cut a slit, just enough for the baby to be able to get its head out and breathe. And it wasn't uncommon to lose 1 or 2 babies out of a clutch of, you know, 16 or 18 eggs, but used to get pretty good hatch rates if the eggs were strong and fertile to begin with. And you could usually tell when you candle the eggs whether the veins were good and strong or whether they were weak. And if they were weak, sometimes they would make it, sometimes they wouldn't. But good, strong eggs with strong veins and a well-developed embryo usually got a pretty good hatch rate.
It's, you know, I don't know how I missed this, but it looks like you did say in the book that you get them 86, 87, and then you for the first week, and then you slowly increase it up to 89. And then you actually drop it back down to 85, 86, basically in the last final week of the incubation process.
Right. And you'll hatch more babies successfully, in my experience, if you drop that temperature during that final week.
And it's funny you say that, because I've heard another story where somebody lost power and it dropped down to a deadly temperature for a few hours, but then they're able to get it back up and the entire clutch hatched out perfectly. I feel like something Jurassic like that helps the clutch. Like, I don't know what it is, but maybe not that Jurassic, right? But just some sort of fluctuation. You know what I'm saying? Because you got to think, like, I always thought in my head, like, in the wild, I understand she's wrapped around these eggs, but doesn't she move around? Like, isn't there times where she adjusts and there's certain parts of the egg that were under her body that's now exposed to air, and some are getting air, some aren't? Like, I always thought that. So that's why I'm like, to have it one temp the entire 52 times, I don't know. I don't know. I always just thought, like, that's not how it happens in the wild. It does it. I mean, I don't see it. I mean, back to what you've experienced. How many times did you ever see the females leave her eggs, or maybe come off her eggs to drink water? Do they ever even leave the eggs at all, from what you saw?
Never, in my experience.
Okay.
The only time I would see a female leaving eggs is when they were rotting, going bad.
Right.
And I tried to get females to drink, spritzing them, holding the water dish up to their mouth.
Right.
My females would never drink. Now, again, I only maternally incubated for 2 or 3 seasons, and then started switching over to artificial. So I don't have a great depth of experience, but yeah, my females would cover the eggs in such a way you would never see the eggs unless you prodded the female to lift a coil. They were completely enclosed by the female's coils. She would move around. You would check her 2 or 3 times throughout the day and evening, and her head would be facing in different directions, and she had shifted slightly, but I never saw her expose the eggs or roll the eggs around or expose them to air ever that I saw.
Okay. And for as far as hydration goes, you were trying to manually give her water, and she would drink for the most part, right?
I never saw a female drink while they were maternally incubating. I tried, spritzing, their coils with some water, holding up a water dish, to give them an opportunity to drink. I don't ever remember a female being interested. They were pretty intent on guarding the eggs, in my experience.
Okay.
That was one of the reasons why I got so keen on switching over to artificial, because you get that female back on feed, you get her hydrated, and it's much easier on the females.
Right. I was going to say, it takes a lot out of the female for her to actually do all the work after it's laid, but respect to people who've done it and do it. It's still like, that's a huge, I think that's awesome that you're able to pull it off. But okay, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind your book.
Sure.
I do notice there's a lot of awesome pictures of actual chondros in the wild. Mark O'Shea, have a lot of credit to that, as far as his picks in your book. What exactly made you want to write this book, and what made you, and what pushed you to it?
Sure. Well, I've always kind of been a natural disseminator of information. I really enjoy helping other people and mentoring people in different things that I've been good at or had success in. So I've always enjoyed passing on information. And when I first started to successfully produce the green trees, I started a website called findgreenTreePythons.com.
Right.
And with a lot of help from my good buddy Tom Phillips, who was an IT professional at the time, and built that website into a fairly large database of green tree python information. And at the same time, I was pretty active on a couple of discussion forums on the internet. And some of those forums had issues with moderation and a lot of fighting and things. And it just wasn't really a an environment that I enjoyed and conducive to really learning. So Tom and I decided to initiate our own forum dedicated to green tree pythons. It was called the Chondro Web Forums. Tom had a website called chondroweb.com, which was kind of a headquarters for hosting different people's websites and information for products and stuff, all dedicated to green tree pythons. So we started the Chondro Web Forums, and they were quite successful. We started off with one forum, and then we branched out. We had a classifieds, and we had a breeding forum, and I think by the end of our second year, we'd had over 1 million hits on the initial forum. And,
wow.
A lot of continuous users and discussion. It was a really fun time. And I noticed after, many months of doing this, and I would spend most of the first half of every day on the computer, either on the forum or answering email, and then the afternoons and evenings I'd work with the animals.
Right.
And I found I was answering many of the same questions over and over and over, which I didn't mind, because I remembered when I was brand new to it, I had a lot of questions, and just because the person has answered the question 100 times, for a lot of other people, when you are the guy that has the question, you're like, hey man, I'm drowning here for information, help me. And so I was happy to help, but I got the idea, what if I were to put all this information in a book, and that way it would be a resource that we could distribute to people, and we wouldn't have to necessarily address the same topics and the same information over and over. So I originally approached, I'm not sure how to correctly pronounce the publishing house. It's KNOPH, I think, Nope. Anyway, they're a natural history publishing house.
Okay.
And approached them and got an initial positive response back and a request for additional information, manuscript. So I sent them some additional materials and never heard back. Sent some follow-up, never heard back. So I kind of dropped the project. And then I was at the Pottstown, Pennsylvania Reptile Show in 2002 and came across a table with a vendor there selling books and T-shirts and stuff by the name of Bob Ashley. You may have heard of him. And,
good old Bob.
I saw his business card, and it said, publisher. And so I waited until he was done talking to a couple people, and walked up and introduced myself and said I had this idea for Green Tree Python book. And he said, yeah, why don't you, when you get back home, send me, your ideas for it. So I got home and quickly went over my previous materials that I had sent to the other publisher and added some stuff. And I sent him a list of the table of contents and an introduction and like half of a chapter on something. I forget what, caging or whatever.
Right.
Sent it off to him and got a very favorable response back and said he wanted to greenlight the project. And I lobbied to be able to do the photography for the book. The printer did not want that to happen because we were really in the early days of digital photography, and the quality, pixel count, and everything was nowhere near what it is now.
I bet.
But I sent some samples to the printer, and they were very positive about the quality of the digital photographs. And so I was able to get the green light from them to actually do the photography as well. So, of course, I solicited some photographs of some other people, and you'd mentioned, Mark O'Shea provided some habitat photos, and a handful of other people contributed photos. But when Bob saw the size and scope of really what I wanted to do and the quality that I wanted to do, he changed it from a paperback to a hardcover with a dust jacket, which, of course, just thrilled me. And so, we took the better part of a year to get everything done. And the first edition came out, and it sold out way faster than Bob had anticipated. I don't remember the exact time, but it was a little less or just over a year, I think, after it was printed. It sold out. And at that time, things in the green tree python world were rapidly evolving. And my book only helped to accelerate that process. And so Bob said, how about, instead of just reprinting that, if we come out with a second edition and you can upgrade it with new information and some of the new morphs and more photography. And I was like, heck yes, let's do that. So the second edition came out in 2005. And Bob just told me at TINLEY, where I met you a couple of weeks ago, that he's got maybe a year's supply left. And then it's going to be out of print. So I'm not sure what he's going to want to do at that point. But that's kind of the story of the book and how it came out. And I've had tons and tons of feedback over the years from people that it's helped get into the hobby and helped them produce their first clutches. And that's always just really a thrill for me, because that was the goal. Any author will tell you that you don't make a bunch of money from writing a book. That was never my goal, really. It was to help people and put that information out there. And so I've been really thrilled with the success of the book.
I don't even want to say people. You helped the whole community. Like, you literally helped thousands, I want to say. And I'm talking about, most importantly, I'm sure, I'm glad they got the help, but I'm talking about the leading chondro breeders to this day right now that we have, you've helped. And that's it's amazing.
Very gratifying.
And you go back to every podcast I've had with, all these legendary chondro breeders, and they all give you respect. So this is why it's awesome just to know the history behind the book, and the reason behind it was just to go ahead and lay down the information so we could keep it going, basically. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I do, before we kind of tap in, I have some notes that I want to kind of bring up about the book. But before we get into that, I'm just curious, after you wrote a book, did your thought of getting out of the chondro game start to pop up in your head shortly after that, or was it a good time after the book when you started thinking about, hey, I think I want to lay low off this for a bit?
Well, the second edition came out in 2005.
Right.
And I sold the business, I think it was at the end of 2009. So I still bred full time, for 4 more years after that. I don't think I ever reached a point in time where I was like, man, I'm done with this. I want out.
Right.
But after 12 or 13 years of full-time animal care, I never had any employees. So, I had help from time to time with my kids, and my daughter-in-law, Dina, really loved the animals and was a help, but
awesome.
I never had any employees. And so, that can become a strain on your life. Vacations are very difficult. Breeding green tree pythons was a year-round thing for me. I would start thermally cycling in October, November, pairing up the animals, recording copulations. Then you got ovulations. Eggs are starting to be laid January and February. Babies are hatching out this time of year, March and April. Then you're spending, a couple of months establishing the babies, getting them all feeding, which is a lot of work, feeding baby green tree pythons. And then, I had customers on waiting lists. So, by the time the babies were well established in, June or July, I was shipping animals, having people come to the facility and pick animals up if possible. And I had, maybe September to catch my breath, and then October's there and you're cycling again. So It was hard to take vacations or really to do a whole lot else. And I won't ever say that I was burned out on it, but at the end of 12 or 13 years, when a change suggested itself, I was kind of ready. My youngest child, my third child is my daughter. She was in high school. And I had sort of thought that a good time maybe to transition out of full-time green tree python breeding would be after she had graduated. And I was approached by a guy to buy a portion of my collection a year or two earlier than that. And I told him no. It's like, I can't really sell you half of it. This is my living. I either I can sell you a couple of nice animals, or I have to sell you all of it, but I can't sell you half of it. So he came back the following year, and made me an offer for the entire business. And my wife and I talked about it extensively and just felt like it was a good time for us to experience a change and move on to something else. And, you know, I'm kind of a guy that I've always kind of reinvented myself every few years. You know, I started off out of high school playing music.
Right.
And then I got into carpentry and was a finished carpenter. Then I was a furniture maker. Then I was a reptile cage manufacturer. Then a green tree python breeder. And I did green tree pythons as a career longer than anything I'd ever done in my life previous to that. And now I've been doing guitar repair for 12 years. So I'm about even with how long I was into green tree pythons. And now here I am getting ready to retire in the next year or two from guitars. And I'm transitioning back to doing some snakes and specifically some ball pythons for some, retirement income. But that's just kind of how it happened. It wasn't really planned out. I didn't put a date on the calendar and say, as of this date, I'm done. The opportunity presented itself, and we decided to move in that direction when it happened.
I mean, because here's the thing, Greg. I mean, I'm so new into this, but I'm also so just appreciative of like what I have already. And I have friends who like been in this long enough to tell me that whatever is here today might not be here tomorrow. And I try to like just keep that in the back of my head that like I do just appreciate what I have now, because who knows what the future holds, right? But
right.
When you got out, I mean, let's say like when you got rid of your last Chondro, how did you adjust to life? Like, I'm just curious, was it easy? I mean,
no. Every major change I've made has been bittersweet. The only company that I was really happy to be out of was Cage Master, and that's just because the work was so physically demanding. I look at the guys now selling the acrylic cages and incubators and stuff, and I'm like, man, you guys don't realize how good you have it. Because back in the days of melamine, before all the plastic manufacturing became popular, I mean, that stuff was heavy. I'm not exaggerating. We lugged, hundreds of thousands of pounds of that stuff, up and down people's fire escapes on deliveries to third stories of apartment buildings and in and out of shows. And it was very heavy, demanding work. And I was on the road constantly because I was doing reptile shows, for a living. That was our primary marketing. And so I was really happy to be out of that. But, every change that I've made has been bittersweet. And when the last Chondro went out the door, you always, second guess, was that really the right decision? And then you think, well, you have to consider what you think is best for yourself and your family. And if you make a mistake, then you fix it later. You can always go back and start up again, but it was bittersweet. And, there were a lot of people in the community at large, I think, that were not happy with the decision. And I understand that. I have deep respect for the people that have been in this business, 20, 30, 40 years and have never transitioned out and done anything different. That's just really not who I am. I kind of need some variety and need to do some different things. And maybe that's a character flaw. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But it was not easy to, those first few months. You miss the animals, you miss the community and everything. But I launched myself into guitar work, and that became, another obsession, and something that I pushed myself at just as hard as I did with the green tree pythons. And so it's easy. It's easier.
I can't imagine fixing guitars being something like, oh, this is going to be great. It just seems so tedious and like, oh my God, bro. Like
it's the building part that's really the challenge. Most people repair while they're building up their build business. And that's the goal, is to be a full-time builder and transition out of repair. I found that I really enjoy repair. I enjoy the challenge. Somebody brings to me a 1948 Gibson J45 that's literally falling apart, and I restore that to a playable instrument. I find that really interesting work.
You want to know what I find interesting that's kind of similar to what you just said? or not interesting, but one thing I used to like doing was establishing an import that was broken, or like a snake that I got in that was not the way it was supposed to be. Because my introduction into the green tree python game, and I'll be honest, like I only knew about imports straight off the bat. Like I didn't even like inquire about United States captive-born and bred until I was getting these chondros that, you know, majority of them were dying on me, and I didn't know why. You know what I'm saying? But what made me want to get into the chondros as passionately as I did was the ones that did make it, like the ones that I did get established, and the ones that I have in this room today. Like I felt like, because I had a lot of people who not really doubted me, but they told me like, yo, don't, like, this isn't good. Like, you know, you're really going the wrong route, blah, blah, blah. And I get what I'm that guy now. Now I'm that guy to say, dude, do not go to imports because holy shit. But like, I'm somebody who, like, I am who I am based off my own hard-headed ways of, like, let me learn on my own. I want to learn. I want to find out on my own if this is as bad as what you say it was. And honestly, because of that torment I put myself with establishing imports and having to put some in the freezer and all this other shit, it made me appreciate chondros for what they are. Now, especially United States captain-born and bred, because Trooper Walsh wasn't lying. If you want to step in the right direction with chondros, you got to go United States captain-born and bred, or literally you're going to be in a fucking merry-go-round where you're not going to really be going anywhere. And honestly, it was a numbers game, dude. I'll tell you right now, Greg, I don't know what, out of the 17 imports I have bought, I mean, 8 of them made it. You know, the rest didn't make it, you know. And you know, after that, I realized why you should invest in a United States captain-born and bred, because you won't be having to go through. But like I said, I feel like some people need to go through this death experience. You got to figure out if you're meant for this or not, because at the end of the day, you will admit, Greg, death is in the future of breeding chondros. It's going to happen.
Absolutely.
This is not breeding ball pythons. And what I mean by that is I'm thankful for the chondros, because the ball pythons I had down. Like, I didn't experience any death until I think last year I had my first hatchling that died on me, which boo fucking who. Like, I don't care now. Like, I'm like built for toughness because of these chondros. But if it wasn't for these chondros, I felt like I'd be a little soft little Sally. So I feel like some people, like especially somebody who, because you got to admit, man, and people get into this and they don't have a lot of money. Like they're trying to just, they love it. They see social media and they try to save up to get certain things. And some people can't afford a $1,500, $2,000 United States captain-born neonate. You know what I'm saying? But they can afford a $500, $600 imported neonate. So I tell people this: roll the dice if you want to roll the dice, but don't come crying or complaining if it doesn't make it, because this is what you got to see if you're made for this or not. Death is what comes with the package of getting into chondros, plain and simple.
Right. Yeah. I always tell potential green tree python breeders, you haven't lived until you've thrown 10 or 12 $2,000 a piece dead babies in the trash can. And it happens to everybody.
I still have mine in a Ziploc bag. Like I was like, oh man, you don't understand. Like it was not easy to have not my knee, like, you know, because, you know, like I said, I was happy to get a clutch, and then I was like, okay, yeah, all these eggs are going downhill, but I had one snake make it out of each clutch, and that was like, holy shit, you know what I mean? I couldn't believe it, you know what I'm saying? So like I said, I'm still green to this, man. Like I'm only like, I'm about to, last year I got no clutches from chondros because I only had one girl I had paired up and she got locked, nothing happened. But this year, whole other story. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I have one girl who just pre-lay shed and 3 others look pretty good. So I have I could possibly have my work cut out for me, but I fucking ready for it, Greg. Bring it on, dude. I'm ready. You know what
Excellent.
I'm saying? I got your book. I got you here right now. I'm in a good place. You see?
You are.
All right. So let's get back to the book real quick, Greg, because I got to ask you, a lot of the stuff that you break down in the book seems to be stuff that has been passed down from research in the wild and whatnot. And I feel like a lot of people are so influenced, no matter what species it is. But nowadays, right, whenever somebody is new and they want to get into something new, for the most part, they want it decked out in a bioactive in a tank, and they want to live plants and stuff like that. And I'm just curious, like, there's a lot of like, hey, you know, there's no yes or no to that. It all depends on what your experience is. But for the most part, did you ever go any kind of bioactive route with any of your chondros at all? Or did you ever experience with bioactive stuff with any of your chondros? Or would you even recommend bioactive to any chondro collection? And while you're talking, I'm going to use the restroom, but I can hear what you're saying.
Sure. Yeah. So in general, I discourage chondro keepers from going in the bioactive direction. My good friend Gary Scavino just had a new YouTube video that he put out a couple of days ago on how to set up chondros from hatchlings through yearlings, through young adults, and then through breeders, and why he discourages people from going bioactive. And the reason for that is they can be very difficult to keep clean. And with green tree pythons, it's so much simpler to have a tub setup or a cage setup where you can control the humidity and the temperature parameters and have clean substrate. And there's enough problems with chondros and potential problems with chondros that you don't want to add to that by complicating cleanliness and maintaining an environment with bioactive. Now, that said, I kind of feel the same way about that as I do people wanting to get into imports. If you know what you're getting into and you're willing to accept the risk and you research it thoroughly and you have a good reason for wanting to experiment with bioactive, then I say under those circumstances, yeah, that might be something that somebody wants to get into. But just to do it, you know, on emotion, I think the snakes are so much happier. Snakes are so primitive, their brains are so small, you know, they're looking for food and to not get eaten by something else, and later on for mating opportunities. And that's pretty much what they live for. And you provide those things to them and some security, from perceived enemies, they're going to be content whether they're in a more Spartan cage environment or in a bio type cage. And so I never did that. I even switched after a while. I used to have all my cages with mulch in the bottom. And I switched that out toward the last few years. I was breeding to newspaper in the bottom of the cages just because it was so much easier to keep clean and to change. So that's kind of my thoughts about that. I don't judge or condemn anybody that wants to do bio, but I just say go into it for the right reasons and understand the risks.
Now, I mean, I have to say, with the argument to this day in Facebook groups about people who prefer to go bioactive or feel like that's the route, I mean, did you have that kind of back and forth back in the day too on your website, or were there people trying to promote bioactive back then, or was it just like everyone listening to you because you're the man? Like, what was happening?
I think bioactive has become much more popular and has been promoted a lot more in recent years. I don't really remember a whole lot of that, back in the days when I was first getting into it. And then after I started having consistent breeding success, I do have a picture in my book, a couple of pictures from a guy that I corresponded with. I don't remember his name, but he had a very advanced level of bioactive caging that he was experimenting with, and he had automatic misting on timers and a day and night photo period on timers, and I think he was even doing like moon phase night lighting, and it was heavily planted, but he was like super into every detail on it. And that's the only guy that I ever really remember approaching me about it or wanting, to promote that. And, my response to him at the time, if I remember, because it's been a long time ago, was, I think your ideas are interesting. If they work for you, then go for it. I'm even willing to put a couple of pictures of your cages in my book to illustrate what you're doing, but it's not something that I'm going to recommend for most keepers and breeders, just because of the difficulty with sanitation and environmental control.
Now here's one thing that I also hear people that tend to steer away from, and I'm like, well, hold on, like, because the bioactive, I for me, like, I just know, like, I'm good. Like you said, you have to pay a lot of attention to detail, and you can't skip much shit. Like, you got to be on top of your stuff if you want bioactive, and that's just talking one snake. We're talking multiple. Yeah, good luck, right? So I already knew, like, I'm not going to go down that route. I'll put a pothos. Shout out to my boy Socrates. He taught me just to throw a nice house plant in there. You know, keep the I put them on puppy pads, nice fresh water, and that's it. Shit, where was I going with that? Damn it.
You said Craig, when you weren't going to go bio because of the level of.
Yeah. Okay. So, here we go. Yes. Thank you. You're the man. So, but one thing that I was doing, and I saw some people, and this is the reason why I was doing this so much, was because I was experiencing bad sheds. It does get pretty dry where I'm at, but I was noticing, okay, that whenever I noticed a snake going in a shed, if I sprayed it heavily, I mean, not drenching it, but if I sprayed that fucker really good, it shed like really like complete. So in my head, I was like, I'm spraying my snakes. I'm not going to spray them every day, but I'm going to spray as needed, especially if I feel like it's dry. I'm going to spray my snakes. And then I would hear other people on the podcast, not a lot of people, but some people say, I don't spray my snakes. I've had snakes get RI because of spraying or other reasons behind that. But have you always been a believer in spraying your animal? I mean, where do you stand with that?
Well, when I first started off with my very first chondros from Trooper, he gave me a copy of a paper that he had written and published for the zoological world about his experiences with his very first imported animals and how he had successfully gotten them to breed. And his daily care regimen involved daily spraying. And I think he pretty much assumed that, the area and regions that these animals come from are subject to a lot of rainfall, annual rainfall, and high humidity. And so that was something he thought, would naturally lend itself, well to captive husbandry for them. So that's kind of how I was mentored and trained in keeping, was for a daily spraying regimen. That said, I think I shouldn't say any, there's always exceptions, but for most reptiles, even those from a high humidity environment, they need fresh air exchange. And so there's a big difference, and I really went to pains to point this out in my book. There's a big difference between a wet cage and having humidity. And you have to establish through proper ventilation and heating and the ambient conditions in your room and the size of your water bowl, that stuff all, works together, what kind of substrate you're using. But you need evaporation to get humidity. Humidity is the measure of water vapor in the air, not how wet the substrate is. And I used to see some cages occasionally where the substrate was soaking wet, but yet the cage really didn't have high humidity, and that's because there was no evaporation. So I always made sure, even with a daily spray regimen, to provide air exchange for my animals. And I always wanted to see those cages dry by the end of a 24-hour cycle. I never wanted to see them set wet and stagnant 24 hours a day. Now, the slight exception to that is new hatchlings. I would make sure those never really completely dried out. But even with those, and I was raising those in plastic shoe boxes and rack systems, even with their high humidity needs, you want to allow them to have a drying cycle in between the heaviest part of the humidity cycle.
Right. I mean, because they can get away from certain parts of the rain if they want. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I feel like, to me, I do it based off how I look at the animal. Like, I mean, for the most part, I spray everything in here whenever I spray the plants, which is like about twice a week, if that at the most. But if I do see an animal that is in deep blue, you know what I'm saying, I do just make sure I spray that animal, just because I don't have to deal with a bad shed. And that's just something I've realized for like the last 4 years of keeping them. That's what's worked for me. And I noticed in your book that you do spray your animals too. So I was just curious if you even had any kind of experience with having an animal get RI from spraying it. And I'm glad I brought RI up because I'm curious. RI is, nidovirus. That's something that's talked a lot about. A lot of people talk about nidovirus, how, it's in a lot of people's collections. They don't know it, how you should be testing. What's your experience based off getting RI in your collection and that leading to like nidovirus, or if you ever got nidovirus, if you could kind of talk about that.
Yeah, so I had a few cases of RI pop up over the years. I never had a chronic problem with it. I had access to Trooper Walsh's vet at the time, who had a 2-part drug regimen. I believe the names of the drugs were Fortaz and amikacin. But we would inject a mixture of those, and also some lactated ringers, which is used in hospitals just to hydrate patients. We would inject that under the skin of the animal because one of those two, I think the amikacin, was hard on the kidneys. So we wanted to make sure the animal was extra hydrated. So we would inject, the saline solution along with them. That always seemed to work well. Strangely, my cases of RI seem to pop up randomly in animals that didn't seem to give any indication as to what the problem otherwise was. Like, I didn't get them during cycling season when animals were being dropped, in temperature at night, or, females just laying eggs and they're stressed, the types of situations where you would expect an animal to maybe have a compromised immune system and experience something like that. It would just be some random animal in the middle of, the summer, half grown or, whatever, and bang, all of a sudden you'd clean the cage and the animal, would shrink back a little bit when you open the door, and you would hear that little telltale raspy sound. And, I would put them on that drug regimen, and it always seemed to knock it out. I'm sure it might have happened, but I don't remember actually losing any animals to RI. But I was fortunate enough to contact a local veterinarian here in the Central Ohio area who was willing to work with me on exotics. Her name, she's retired now, but her name was Dr. Ann Crafton, and we formed a really valuable relationship. And she worked with me through a number of issues, including egg binding and a few other things. But my experiments with RI were, just kind of limited to those few cases that popped up randomly, and we always seem to be able to treat them effectively.
Now, with that being said, when it came down to your neonates, I'm just always curious because I talk to other people how they'll tell me how, like, I won't make anything available for like the first year or two, just because you don't really know what this snake's going to turn into. So when you were, let's just say, the last few years of your career, before you even knew you were going to stop breeding chondros, how are you picking your holdbacks? Like, how are you really eyeballing and looking at a clutch and seeing or knowing which ones you need to hold on to, or other than that, like, how long were you waiting before you would sell a chondro or a neonate to somebody or make one available?
Sure. Well, I would always carefully go over the hatchlings, and anything that stuck out to me that, was abnormal, animal that was colored differently than all the rest, or had unusually high patterning, or maybe a complete lack of pattern. Those were all animals that caught my eye, and I would, want to make those as holdbacks. Sometimes I would just randomly, pick out 3 or 4 animals from a clutch and say, I'm just going to hold these back. But I would, when I first started off, my first couple of years, I was sending babies out after they'd had 5 or 6 meals. And I mean, these were animals that, I would open up the tub, stick a pinky in front of them. They were banging it, and I'm like, man, these things are good to go. And then I would ship them out, and about half the animals, people were saying, hey, I can't get this animal to eat. I'm like, you're kidding. It ate, 5 or 6 times for me. It was really doing well. And I would coach them through it, and most of the time we'd get those animals going. I don't, again, this is many, many years ago. I don't specifically remember anybody losing animals from not feeding that I told them. But Anyway,
Well, here's the
I
real quick
eventually
to talk. Oh shit, go. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think there's a
I
little bit of lag. I'm
eventually
sorry.
I eventually started waiting until I had maybe 12 or 14 meals in them, and they started to show a little bit of growth. And I had way less problems with them going off feed for customers after I had gotten them established with 12 or 14 meals. Occasionally it still happened. I could tell you a few funny stories about that, but yeah, that's typically they were about 3 months old and had a dozen meals in them, and they would usually do real well for people after that. And then I would hold the other ones back, and I would hold some back to add to my breeding colony, and I would hold others back to sell as yearlings. Some people, they didn't want to buy a chondro unless they knew what it was going to turn out like. So, the upside to that is that you know what it's going to look like. The downside to it is it can get a lot more expensive when you see what it's going to look like.
Right. So, I mean, that's why, if you're in a position where you could hold on to that animal as long as you can, you're almost in a better position. Well, I mean, I guess it depends. It's a gamble because either way, you're either going to sell it for just as much as you could sell it for or even more. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, there's a whole market out there.
Figured,
there's people that want babies and people that want babies and people that want yearlings. So I sold both.
Right. So with that being said, I mean, your average price, and I want to kind of get into the bloodlines and the your actual lineage and whatnot of these chondros, but back when you were first selling chondros, it's not really like, because nowadays there's so many like documentations on things where it could put a high price on a neonate, right? But for your instance, you're the foundation of this for the most part. So what were your prices going for on some of your higher end stuffs back in the day? Like, I'm just curious, like, how are you pricing these?
Well, I started off pricing my first few clutches the first couple of years based on what I was paying for the animals, just basically market price. So I think yellow babies back then were going for around $600 or $700, and maroon babies were going for closer to $900 to $1,200. And as I started to have breeding success, I started learning what some of my bloodlines were going to produce when paired with each other, and raising up yearlings and holding them back. I started to develop recognizable bloodlines. And one of my biggest initial breakthroughs, when you talk about morph breeding or selective breeding, was when I established the calico morph as a heritable trait. And so I felt like those babies were, they were going to be worth more than stuff, that was from unproven lines. And, by unproven, that's not a negative term. That doesn't mean they're, inferior animals. It just, with green tree pythons, these color morphs do not come from the same type of genetics that you're familiar with like corn snakes or ball pythons, where we're working with, recessives and incomplete dominance, and you can work everything out on a Punnett square and calculate, the averages of what you can potentially expect from parents. With green tree pythons, some of the most outrageous color morphs started off with a baby that was produced from parents that looked nothing like it. We've all heard about the lemon tree line, and there's still people out there, I believe, working with lemon trees. The first lemon tree babies were produced from green parents, if I remember correctly. And there's been blue line animals that have been started from non-blue parents. There's been blue animals that have been bred together and haven't produced blue offspring. So it's a time process, and you have to mix and match parents and see what happens. And when you get a pair that hit on a particular result that you like, then you hope and pray that that female will successfully reproduce again with that male, that they both, live and successfully reproduce. And you can get 2 or 3 or 4 clutches out of that same pair. And then you have a lot more of a proven track record, because fortunately, if they produce a certain result in the babies from one clutch, you tend to get consistent results from them in future clutches as well. So, I had animals that from bloodlines that would the babies would sell for $2,000 or $3,000 a piece. I had some in the $5,000 range, and then I had yearlings that occasionally would sell for as high as $10,000 or $15,000. I think the most expensive yearling I ever sold was a calico animal for $20,000. That was actually a holdback that I had no intention of selling, but a customer kept approaching me over and over and over and basically said, name your price. And so I named my price, and they immediately said sold,
Damn, that's how it works.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Okay. So, one thing that, from what I can see, there's a couple big approaches to breeding chondros. There's people like my man, Patrick Holmes, who, I'm not going to say he's not a visual breeder, but the man loves his localities. He's a BAC like savage, knows so many things about the islands within its islands and all that other stuff. How important has the localities been to your success with the chondros? And not me as far as their breeding, but as far as like the lineage and whatnot. Like, how much have you looked at localities to implement it into your projects?
I never was really too focused on localities. I did have a pair of wild collected Arus that I successfully bred, and so that was one of my few forays into imported animals and breeding locality animals. If you read my book, you'll quickly see when I start to discuss locality that I was not and am not a fan of just throwing around locality names. And
Right.
I tried to emphasize this in my book in a way that I hoped was fair to everyone, but yet still insisted on documentation and scientific facts. And, the whole locality thing way back in the early days of captive reptile breeding kind of started with the gray band king snake people. And,
Right.
They would actually document, geographic waypoints, and certain roads and certain counties and everything. And they would line breed those animals and keep meticulous records. But they were actually able to go and hand collect those snakes. So they knew exactly where the founding stock had been picked up, like down to the road. And to me, that's what locality means. Locality does not mean what an animal looks like. Locality means I collected this animal, or somebody that I know and trust with good data collected this animal at a certain geographic location. That's where the wild founder stock came from. That bloodline has been faithfully produced in captivity, and these offspring are, third, fourth, whatever generation from this documented founder stock. To me, that's locality breeding. And I know there's quite a bit of locality breeding being done now with green tree pythons. I see it all the time on social media. I don't really know, and frankly, I don't care, because, and I don't say that in a flippant way, but I'm not. It's not my job to follow up and police what's going on. I really don't care if the animals are being represented honestly. That's really all anybody would ask. But so I don't really know these days how deeply documented some of these locality projects are or aren't.
I hardly doubt they are, because I can tell you right now, it seems like something comes in that's like fucking Afrak or just some island I've never even heard of before, and I'm just like, what's like this is like, how are we knowing for sure? Like, because it's so easy to write anything on a lid, you know what I'm saying? So
right.
And it gets shipped over here, and it's and I've been through the ringer a lot with this, maybe because the importer I used to go through, but I used to get sent like Liras and Jayapuras and Cyclops and things that were just a BAC or something, so that is still misleading and mislabeling localities on chondros is definitely a huge thing that's happening and still happening today.
And that was something that I really fought against a lot, and it wasn't always popular, but I wanted the animals to be represented honestly, and I resented people importing animals when I was trying to do all the work to produce good domestic captive-bred, well-started animals, and then people were importing things and trying to jack the prices way up by putting locality labels on them. And we have to remember, there's race and there's locality, and those are two different things. I think it's pretty easy to tell an animal from the Bioactive Islands because they have distinct characteristics. Their heads are different, their tails are different. Aru Island animals, which are isolated island populations, they have distinct characteristics, and I think we can safely identify animals, from certain island and isolated, mainland races based on those consistent characteristics. But that's not the same thing as locality. Again, locality means this is where that wild animal was collected from.
Right. Now, I'm just curious, Greg, on what stands out in your mind as far as the projects you're most proud about, and if we could kind of maybe talk about the snakes involved in that. What are some of the most proudful accomplishment projects that you that stand out in your mind?
Sure. Well, the main project that was kind of identified with me, and I really sort of developed it from the initial founder animal, which was produced by Trooper, was the Calico project. So Trooper hatched out this animal in 1993, and I first saw it as a yearling in 1994, and he had it at I believe it was the Orlando show that year, and he had some outrageous price on it. It was a dollar value that at the time was unknown, in Chondro land for any animal ever having been. And it was well, people know the animal I'm talking about. His pictures are well documented. They're in my book and everything. But he had that pixelated, pattern of just many different colored scales. And Trooper's partner, Eugene Bissett, nicknamed him the Popcorn Chondro. And I kept walking by the table and just looking at that animal, and it was just one of those watershed moments where I just thought, I don't know if those traits are even going to be passed on to any offspring, but I just have to have that snake. It was the most beautiful and outrageous chondro that I'd ever seen. So halfway through the second day of the show, I walked over to Trooper's table with the requisite cash in my hand and said, I'll buy him. And Trooper was like, what? And I said, I want to buy that snake. And I'm not 100% sure he ever really intended to sell it. That was kind of an advertising thing for him at a high price just to generate interest. But anyway, he sold him to me. And it's kind of a funny anecdote. Trooper's wife at the time, a very sweet woman by the name of Ann, came over to my table a couple hours later, and she was like, Greg, are you really sure you want to do that? It's okay if you want to back out. She was so worried for me that, she knew I had kids to feed, and whatever. And I said, no, I think, I'm committed. Well, that ended up being one of the best, investments that I'd ever made. And, major kudos to Trooper for producing the animal. But I line bred him. I line bred him back to his sister and produced Calico Jr. And Calico Jr. was almost like a photographic negative of his father. Same pixelated pattern, same distinct head stamp, same multicolored patterning and everything, but all the dark and light colors were reversed. So it was almost like a photographic negative. And it was the first chondro that I ever hatched, and it was the first one that I ever saw anybody else hatch. That was a dark brown, completely patternless baby. And I knew something wild was up with it when it hatched. And so I started to raise him up. And when he got to be about 7 or 8 months old, that pixelated pattern started to develop, and I'm like, oh yeah. And he developed into what he was. And so that's probably, you know, if I had to pick one animal out of everything I ever hatched out that I was, you know, really thrilled to produce, was probably him.
Did you send it to me? Were those one of the animals you sent me?
Yeah, that's actually the animal that you used in the photograph for the advertise. Yeah, right there. Yeah.
Unbelievable, bro. This thing is crazy. I think this snake right here just changed people's perspective on chondros all as a whole. This one in the El Diablo for sure, or El Diablo, Diablo. And then this one right
she's
here.
Probably my second favorite. Yeah.
That's her, right?
Yeah. That snake was another dark hatchling, and then she just started developing those blue scales all over her without ever really going green.
How many clutches did you end up getting from her?
From Ella?
Oh, we got a bet.
Yeah, from Ella Diablo.
You there? Is the connection slow? Can you hear me?
A little bit. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
you might need
Ella
to exit
Diablo,
out and come back in because I think the connection's bad.
Okay, I'll exit out and come back.
You might need to reset real quick. Cool. Appreciate you guys' patience. I have a lot of notes from his books, and I just want to make sure I cover everything. So that's why I'm looking down. Don't think I'm not paying attention because I am. This is epic. But yeah, let's get Greg's connection back here on point. You there, Greg? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, we're good.
So I think you were asking me about Ella Diablo producing.
Yeah. How many clutches did you end up successfully getting from her?
Unfortunately, 0.
Wow. Okay.
She never successfully bred, and it was especially disappointing because she was from a project that produced the first ever albino, so she was a possible het for albino.
Jeez, man. And you know, it's funny you bring up the albino because do you know a chondro breeder / ball python breeder by the name of Marshall Mendez?
Oh yeah, I've known Marshall for years.
What a player. I love that guy.
Yeah.
I would say him and Gary definitely two of the most outstanding chondro breeders I've had to meet. Bill Stiegel, Patrick, of course, there's Texas people, of course, I love them, but I'm telling you right now, those two right there. Anyway, so Marshall really inspired behind the albino project. I mean, he's gotten close. Have you ever been able to hatch out any albino, or like what has the albino been to your projects?
Well, the first albino was hatched out by a guy named Damon Salceus, and it came from an animal that was part of a project called the Maruk Outcross Project. It was if my 64-year-old memory is correct, those animals were started from a group that were imported by David Tracy Barker.
Nice.
And Trooper got a hold of one or some of those animals, produced a clutch. I bought an animal from that clutch, and a couple other people, Damon did, and then Damon ended up hatching out an albino. So we knew that all the siblings to his parents were possible hets. And my Maruk Outcross male was the father of Ella Diablo, and but I was never able to prove out whether he or her were actually het for albino.
Wow, man! I'm hoping something plans out with Marshall in that albino project because I mean, he was able to hatch one out that didn't make it, but just the eyes. I just remember him sending me a picture of the eyes. And I was like, oh shit. So that's the albino. Like, you know, when you see albino eyes on a chondro, it's kind of like, bizarre,
Yeah.
Um,
Damon
but
Salcius was able to raise his up to an adult male, but I don't believe he ever successfully bred, and I don't believe he's still alive.
oh man, it's unfortunate. Now, with that being said, I do kind of want to. I know you brought up earlier in the podcast how you want to break down a story behind how you name your chondros, but the intro to that, I want to tell you what one of my favorite chondro is in your book, and that's Blue Frost. And we could go from Blue Frost into the other names, but I'm just curious the inspiration behind naming Blue Frost. I mean, obviously we know why Blue Frost is Blue Frost, but what's the story with Blue Frost, if you don't mind?
Yeah, Blue Frost was, to my knowledge, the first dark neonate in collections of those of us who were working with blue line chondros that morphed directly from a brown baby into a blue adult with no intermediary green phase. Now, there's some disagreement, some controversy with that. I know there's another famous blue animal by the name of Mr. Blue.
Mr. Blue.
That also morphed.
Who owns that? Is that a Rich Culver or someone? Who owns that one? I forget.
No, I don't think Mr. Blue is still with us. He was hatched way back in the day, around the same era and same time as Blue Frost. But he was produced by an animal owned by a friend of Troopers by the name of Tim Morris.
Tim Morris.
And then a guy by the name of John. I don't remember John's last name, but he ended up buying Mr. Blue, and Mr. Blue sired some really outstanding blue line animals. And I know that Mr. Blue morphed directly from a brown animal to a blue animal also. But Blue Frost was 1 year older than Mr. Blue. If again, I'm going on, many years ago of memories, but I remember Trooper Walsh made a post on the Chondro web forums about Mr. Blue transitioning from brown baby to blue without any green intermediary change. And at that time, Blue Frost had already done the same thing the year before. But I named him Blue Frost because he literally just started getting random tiny little blue scales all over him when he started to undergo the ontogenic color change, and it looked like he had blue frosting on him. It was wild and beautiful. Yeah.
It'd just be wild just to even be the only one to kind of experience, be the first one to experience something like this. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, it really awesome. Was.
So, let's kind of get into the story of why you named the snakes that you name them, or what you wanted to talk about.
It's really kind of funny. When Tom Phillips started to develop my first green tree python website, he built a shell, and then I started filling in content. And this was really before the dawn of quality digital photography. I think there were some very rudimentary digital cameras starting out for available to consumers at that time, but everybody pretty much was still shooting film. And so I took all the pictures for my initial website using film, and then I would scan the photographs after I got them developed at the store, bring them back home. I would scan them and then email the files to Tom, and he would put them on the website. And I had to come up with a file name for each photograph. I had to name it something. And so just to have a name to put on the files, I just started making up names that looked like the snakes. So we had Aquaman, Aqua Girl, Blue Diamond, Lemon Girl. And I didn't really intend for those to be the names of the snakes. They were just names of photograph files, JPEG files. Well, I launched the website. My animals and the content on the website started to generate a lot of interest and enthusiasm with new keepers and potential breeders. I started getting inquiries and emails about animals and hatchlings, and people started saying, "Hey, I'm really interested when Blue Frost produces, or not, Blue Diamond," and I'm like, "Who? That snake on your website named Blue Diamond?" I was like, "Oh, okay." So it sort of developed into a game after that of coming up with funny and creative names for the snakes. So, I named the calico animal that I'd gotten for Trooper. And by the way, I put that calico tag on it. He hadn't called it anything, in particular. And really, it's not exactly calico. I mean, the calico cat's probably the most common, iteration of a calico animal. But I just thought it was a descriptive term that matched all the different colors. But so I named him the computer chondro because, when you get up real close to a computer image and you can see the image start to break up into the pixels, I thought that's what he looked like. So named him that. But most of the early animals, they were just named a descriptive name based on the appearance. But then we started to have some fun with it. So one of my favorites is back in the year 2000. Those of your followers out there that are old enough to remember the presidential election that year, there was a big controversy between Al Gore and George W. Bush.
I remember that.
And down in Florida, to determine who won Florida, it would determine who won the presidential election. So we had the election, and Florida was they were unable to declare a winner because of counting these ballots that were paper ballots that had been punched by a stylus when the person voted. And many of the ballots had a piece of paper hanging off the back that didn't completely punch through, and it was called a chad. And they were talking in the news about hanging chads. And I thought, man, that is a great name for a chondro. So I named one of my high yellow males Hanging Chad.
That is an epic name. I got to say, that is classic.
My daughter-in-law is a big fan of the movie Jane Eyre. And I think it's spelled Eyere, and it's like set back in, British medieval times or whatever. But I thought, hey, that's a great name for a snake that hangs from a branch, Jane Eyre. So I named one of my chondros Jane Eyre, but we spelled it A-I-R. Ella Diablo is roughly translated she-devil, and she got that name because she was one of the nastiest chondros that I ever raised. She would go after you. So the names were started off as JPEG files, and then after a while we just grew to have a lot of fun with it.
I have to ask you, the way, people would approach you about, hey, I want in on this clutch if it goes. I mean, were you doing wait lists back then, or how were you having people be on a waiting list and that's how you would sell your chondros, or what were you doing back then for that?
Well, my first few years, I just sold them after they were established and put pictures up and people would select them. But then when my animals started to really gain in popularity and I had people inquiring, year round about certain clutches and bloodlines, I started to develop waiting lists. And in order to make it manageable and maintain my sanity, I basically set out the guideline that I didn't start a waiting list until eggs were laid. And once I had viable eggs in the incubator, then I would start a waiting list. And a person had to put down a deposit to be on the waiting list. And of course, if the eggs didn't hatch, then the deposits were returned. But if the eggs hatched, then the people could select their baby based on the order that I received their deposit and after I had selected my holdbacks. So if I hatched out, a clutch of 16 or 18 eggs, and I decided to hold back 6, the remaining babies were made available in the order that people had sent in deposits. And I usually wouldn't take more than about 10 or 12 deposits because I didn't want to end up, returning a bunch of deposits for small clutches or whatever. And it worked out into a pretty good system. I think everybody thought it was generally fair. I always had people that wanted to go on waiting lists long before I had eggs. And I was like, man, I just can't do that. That, you know, I spent my whole life managing waiting lists instead of working with the animals.
I mean, I could tell you right now, I mean, it's the percentage of people out there who have chondro waiting lists are fucking like 5%. I can tell you that. I mean, yeah, majority of them, I'm just saying, like, it's so crazy right now how sought after United States captive born and bred chondros are right now. And good luck. It's just really hard. They're not being produced enough yet. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and I have to ask you, Greg, you know, were there ever times where you came up short on a waiting list clutch or anything like that? Did that ever happen to you?
Oh, sure. You know, and it didn't, you know, is usually a small number of, you know, people that I had to return a deposit to, or sometimes I would only take a few, you know, 6 or 8 deposits, but then I would tell the people in line after that, you know, if I end up hatching more than that, you know, you'll still be in line.
Right.
It's not, there's no perfect way to do it, but that it worked well for me. And I thought it was a way to be the most fair to people, because if I didn't keep waiting lists and just sort of posted on the forum or, you know, on my website, hey, they're available, and then it was a free for all, people didn't really feel like, you know, people would say like, hey, I wrote you 9 months ago about that clutch, and now I'm 20th on the list and I'm not even going to get one. So I came up with the deposits and a waiting list as a way to try to make it fair for people that had communicated with me and expressed interest, and a way to give them an opportunity to get, you know, in line. And yeah, I always had a huge volume of responses the day that I made a waiting list available.
Now, with that being said, how many times or what was your approach with, you know, because I've talked about this plenty of times on the show with multiple chondro breeders that, you know, a neonate could have a different personality than another neonate. Some come out striking, some come out shy, some want to go run for the hills, right?
Right.
When you get the most stubbornest ones, the ones that run away from you, the ones that just don't want anything to do with anything, right? What was your approach with the cis feeding and or force feeding or whatnot? And how long would you do that for to an animal before you felt like, okay, this thing's just not going to understand the way of living?
Yeah. So in any given clutch, it seemed like there was always almost at least one runner. And sometimes I could get those animals to eat voluntarily, just almost literally pestering them to the point where they were so exhausted that they wouldn't run anymore.
Right.
But occasionally I would have to assist feed, and I always reserved assist feeding as an absolute last resort.
Right.
I didn't freak out when I would have a baby that would go for, you know, 6, 7, 8 weeks and not eat. They could definitely go that long. But when I would see an animal, you know, just not making any progress, if it started to lose weight, you know, and I just realized, okay, this animal's either going to die or I'm going to have to assist feed it, you know, then I would assist feed. And I tried a lot of different things. I tried just assist feeding like heads and pieces of tail, and I got the best results from actually triggering the animal to start feeding on its own by assist feeding whole pinkies, the tiniest ones that I could get. I was breeding my own rodents at the time, so I would always snatch out any little runts out of mouse litters and freeze those in a separate bag, and I would use those for assist feeding. And baby chondros have a pretty big mouth, you know, even for a baby.
Even though it doesn't look like it. I mean, I'll tell you what, man. My heart dropped when both my babies came out their eggs. I was like, how the fuck do these things eat in the wild? Like, they are, bro, the size of a quarter when they're perched. Literally, I'm like, wow. Like, and it's scary too, because you think like, can it eat? Like, and there's another thing too. Like, you know, a lot of people experience chondros dropping the pinky right away. Now, when that would happen with you, would you feel like, was that because the pinky was too big, or was that just like them just not wanting it? Like, what was your take with that?
Well, the number one thing that I had to get across to people, and it was usually a difficult process, was getting people to understand that green tree pythons don't eat pinky mice in the wild, and they don't recognize it as a food item. And I would get people that would email me, first time successful breeders, and they were like, I got this, response over and over. It doesn't seem to like the pinky, or it doesn't seem to want to eat. I can't understand why an animal wouldn't want to eat. And the fact is that they don't recognize pink mice as food. You have to train them to eat those. And once you get them going, man, they turn into little chow hounds.
Right.
So I would tease feed, and you get the animal striking. A lot of people wouldn't be aggressive enough in poking and prodding the animal. I would hold the pinky and forceps and use the head of the pinky to prod the chondro and get it in. And usually you can get them to strike. And if they would grab a hold of it and then immediately drop it, I would pick it up and give it back to them again. I would keep the pinkies in a little bowl of hot water because I think that they did better on warm prey than cold. And I would give it to them again. If the pinky got too cold, I'd put it back in the hot water and heat it up again. And I always try to end every feeding session on a positive note. Even if the animal doesn't ultimately swallow the food, if I could get it to hold on for a few seconds before it let go, and then I tried that 5 or 6 times, and I just became convinced that at that point, I was going to stress the animal out more than it was worth. I would back off, and I would come again next week. And it was almost like the animal would pick back up where we left off if we'd made a little bit of progress. So I didn't want to end the session, with the animal and myself just completely frustrated and walking away with complete failure. I always tried to make a little bit of progress. And one thing I noticed definitely is I wanted to have my purchase high enough that the animal did not hit the floor of the tub when it struck and wrapped the pinky. They would almost always drop it if they hit the floor of the tub. So I would keep my perches up high enough so that they were still hanging in the air with the pinky. And most of the time, after 3 or 4 or 5 attempts, on a single feeding session, I could get each animal to grab and wrap up. And I had great success using baby chick down as a scenting tool. I've tried a lot of different things, never had any success with lizards and frogs and other things. Other people have, and more power to them. But I would keep a baby chick in the freezer, and when it was feeding time, I would pinch off a pinch of the real soft, fluffy, downy feathers, put it in a little dish next to my little dish of hot water and pinkies. And if I got an animal that wouldn't wrap up and grab the bare pinky after a few tries, I would stick a few little wisps of the chick down onto the nose of the pinky. And you always want to do it so you had a few dry, fluffy tufts of the down sticking up. If it was all wet and matted down, it didn't work as well. And almost always, if I could get them to tongue flick that down and strike, they would wrap it up and swallow. And usually 2 or 3 weeks of that, and they would get the hang of it and realize this is food. And then you open up that tub early evening with some subdued lighting, and they'd be there waiting for the food. And after that, it was all downhill. But the runners occasionally would need to be assist fed.
And from how you would do things, would it be nighttime feeding, daytime feeding, anytime? Like, how are you really managing or determining when to feed the neonates?
I would usually feed in the late afternoon, and with multiple clutches, it could take several hours to work through a whole rack of babies. So what I would do is I would start with the first tub. I would turn down the main lighting and just use like one little low watt bulb in a clip light, stick it over in the corner so that I could see what I was doing, but it wasn't real bright. And I would try that baby, and if I could get that baby to strike and hang on, I would very slowly just kind of slide off to the side and go upstairs and do some computer work. And I would set a timer, because sometimes I would get really busy with something on the computer and then realize, oh, it's been 45 minutes and I forgot. Go back down to the chondro, swallowed the pinky, and it's climbing around the rack. So I would set a timer for like 10 minutes, go back down. If it had dropped it, I would give it back to it again if it would take it. If not, I'd slide the tub, close, open the next one, and I would just work my way through the rack until I offered every animal a pinky, and of course record on the feeding cards which ones accepted food, which ones needed scent, so that I had that, as a reference for next week.
How are you judging based off like, okay, you know what, this is not going to work today, let's start another day? How are you determining that?
It's just experience. After you've fed a few clutches, you just kind of get a feel for which animals are making progress, and they're holding it a few seconds longer each time, or they're sort of wrapping it up but then dropping it, as opposed to the animals that just are biting it and flinging it. One had nothing to do with it. And again, I try to close the session with each animal by making a little progress. So if I can get that animal to hang on to it for 2 or 3 seconds and then it drops it, I'm like, okay, this animal's not going to eat this time because it's like really going crazy, striking and everything. But I got it to hold on for a few seconds. I'm going to stop there and come back to it the next time. And that always seemed to work pretty well for me.
And just as far as that next time was like what, the next week, a few days later, when would you retry that again?
The following week.
Following week. Okay.
Yeah. I found with a lot of reptiles, including ball pythons, I don't want to go back every other day and establish a pattern of refusing food. I want it to get hungry and be ready again, be completely over the stress of the previous feeding session, and basically back to a fresh start each week, but building on the progress that I had made the week before.
Right.
And I would say on any given, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
On any given clutch, there were always exceptions, but on any given clutch, I could get about 80% of the babies to eat on the first week. And the majority of them, except for maybe 1 or 2 hardcore holdouts, by the second or third week, they were all eating.
I'm just, my last experience with the neonate was a sprinter. Yeah, straight sprinter. Wanted nothing to do with anything. Never even struck for me. And then shout out to my boy Socrates. He was like, hey, send it to me. I promise you I could get this thing in. And he assist feed it for a whole year.
Wow. That's commitment.
And then that's Socrates. The guy, so he's I'm telling you, there's no guy like this in the world, I feel like. But anyways, he got it to assist feed. And when he finally got it to like start striking and wrapping, when it finally ate, it prolapsed. And it's just like all that work, you know what I'm saying? And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Sock's the guy who he wants to know what he's gone this far, so let's fucking find out what this snake's all about. But in my eyes, I just feel, I had somebody, you know who Ryan Young is?
Yes.
Okay. So shout out to my man, Ryan Young. Ryan Young is diverse with so many different python species, been successful at breeding multiple python species. I think up to like 21 species of pythons he successfully produced. But I asked his take on assist feeding, and his take is like, if this thing does not want to establish itself, it does not want to eat, it's not meant to be here. And he personally does not want to carry a bloodline like that on to either the next person or the next project, because he feels like a picky eater is going to produce more picky eaters. So I don't know. That's why I figured out
credible. Yeah, that's certainly a credible philosophy and approach to it. Right.
And like I said, this guy he's successful and has bred some really awesome, I think Waminian or oh man, I can't think. Arus. Could be off right now, but anyway, shout out to Ryan Young. Very inspired by that guy. One thing I do want to talk to you about, other than we were talking about your tips with the neonates and getting them established, but a lot of methods and a lot of different approaches as far as pairing the chondros go. Some people do food cycling, temp cycling, no cycling whatsoever. What has worked for you the most, and what tips can you give us as far as getting chondros to breed? I do want to say shout out to the super chat, John Sloan. I appreciate that. But yeah, he's interested in wanting to know the methods you used to get your chondros to hook up every year. Thank you, John.
Classical music works well. Just kidding. I was taught to thermally cycle when I first got into breeding by Trooper. So that's the method that I used for the most part. I would also use food cycling. Females, I think of any species, are obviously going to be feeding heavily when they're developing follicles, and their bodies need that extra nutrition to produce egg follicles. But I would start to turn off the heat to the cages at nighttime, basically following the weather cycles here in Ohio where I live. So we generally go into late September, early October, with lows beginning to drop at night into the 50s and 60s. And I would not shock my animals by going from their normal 24-hour heat and ambient temperatures of 78 to 85 with a basking spot of 88. I wouldn't shock them by dropping them to 50 degrees overnight for the first time, but I would just turn off the heat at night for a week, and then the following week I would crack open the basement window. I had all my animals in a basement setup, so I had those small casement windows that most basements have, and I would just crack open that window and allow the ambient temperatures in the basement to drop to maybe 70 degrees, and then the following week I'd drop it to 60 degrees or 55. It seemed to me about 55, 58 was about as cool as I ever did. And once I had the animals being cooled at night for 2 or 3, 4 weeks, I would start introducing males to females. I always tried to time that on low pressure systems. Usually get best initial pairings and copulations by pairing animals up during low pressure systems, rainy periods. You would be able to tell pretty readily if the animals were compatible, because the male would show interest in the female. He would crawl all over the cage and leave little urate deposits like markers all over the place. They would usually be locked up in the morning. I would get up at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and go down with my flashlight, check all the pairs and record which ones were locked, and try to see which ones were actually copulating. Some chondros will tail wrap and not actually copulate. The males are just courting the females and tail wrapping, but are not actually getting the deed done. And so I would try to, visually observe the male hemipedes inserted to record an actual copulation. Sometimes you would introduce a male and the female would want to have nothing to do with him. And you can immediately tell by the body language. I mean, she's going to the other side of the cage, going on the floor of the cage. I don't think I ever had a female actually strike at a male, but I've had them, butt the male with a closed mouth. Sometimes the males will freak out and try to get as far away from the female as possible. And if animals are not compatible like that, one or both of them aren't ready, I just go ahead and separate them right away again. But I would continue pairing up the pair for as long as they would copulate. So it was not uncommon for me to have a pair breed 4, 5, 6 times over a 2-week period. I'd separate them, offer food. Usually the female would eat, the male wouldn't. Pair them back up again. Again, if I could time it with a rainstorm or low pressure system, I would. And eventually you get to the point where either they stop breeding or the female goes off feed and is visibly developing egg follicles. And at that point, I wouldn't pair them up anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I paid attention to this year was, because if it's one thing, I told you last year, I didn't have any success, but I did have a pair of sarongs that were locked up in the beginning of the year. And then towards the end, he just stopped, like wanted nothing to do with her. And I was like, well, what the fuck's that all about? And then going into this year, I was like, well, she started going hormonal. Like she looked really blue. She started eating, like slamming food, and he still wasn't locking her. And I was like, what the fuck's going on? So I just took him out, put him into another female that was doing the same thing that the female he was with that was doing, and he locked her. Then I put another male that had already locked another snake in with her, and then he locked her. So I don't know if it was a chemistry thing. I don't know if he was just like, look, I don't know what happened last year, but I don't want nothing to do with this year. But
Right.
I think paying attention to that kind of behavior is what's going to determine if your season's going to go to waste or not. Like if, I don't know. I've had some people tell me, well, wait a week. Oh, leave him alone. He'll be fine. And if I see a male cruising, why the female's in there and he looks stressed out, I'm going to get him out of there. I don't want to fucking, he doesn't want nothing to do with it, And also I've also paid attention to, if that happens and they're not together and then all of a sudden we get hit with the storm or rain happens, then I pair them up and it's a different ball game sometimes. So you just got to weigh it out. I think it all depends on you just trying what you feel is best at that time.
Right. Watch the animals, know your animals.
Yeah. I think so many people are so glued to their notes and what people tell them that like, hey, just go off your eyes. Like, go, like, what does your eyes tell you? And I don't know. I have so many great homies and mentors in this. And at the end of the day, I can't take advice from everyone. I listen to what everyone else's experience has been, but I go off my own. I go off what my eyes see, and I'm going to go with what my heart tells me to say. And then whatever happens, happens, So, because I don't know, at the end of the day, I do know when I was first getting chondros to get locks, and then when I got clutches, I had so many questions, Greg, like, well, what about this? What about that? And you can only, I mean, it doesn't matter who your friends are. It doesn't matter what information is being told on you. You're going to know when that shit happens. That's when you find out, I feel like. And
a lot of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But with that being said, I have another question. When things were going into the direction where the snake would hit ovulation and you would then pull the male, did you keep, like, for instance, like, did it always, does a snake that has a female that ovulated, did you always keep a hot spot for that female throughout the night, like all the time, or did you always kept the nighttime dropped? Like, how did you approach that?
I would continue nighttime drops for all the animals with a resuming of normal daytime temperatures and a hot spot during the day.
Awesome.
Until the female ovulates. Once the female ovulated, I would restore 24-hour heat.
Oh, okay. So you would keep that 24-hour hot spot. You wouldn't no longer drop it.
Once she ovulated, right?
Awesome.
And one of the keys for me was when I learned to discern follicle development from ovulation.
Okay. I mean, and then also to capitalize on that, a lot of people like to track days, as far as when the clutch is due from post-ovulation and pre-lay shed. What did you like? How did you like to track it? What was your preference of tracking when the clutch would be due after, you saw success in copulation from the copulation?
I used to keep extensive notes, and my time span from last copulation to egg deposition was all over the map. But I did get consistent time passages from ovulation and pre-lay sheds to eggs. So I never really tried to plan on anything based on copulation. I always went off ovulation and then the pre-lay shed.
Okay. And then, man, I've had so many people tell me so many horrific stories of females. I know this is with any species, but, with chondros, I hear females taking it a lot harder during the process than others, some of them not making it. How many females have you had with your experience of breeding not make it after laying eggs, or even breeding? How many females have not made it for you?
Gosh, it's hard to remember all the details about specific animals. I know that I lost one female during ovulation because an oviduct basically burst.
Oh, wow.
My vet at the time, Dr. Ann Crafton, did an autopsy of me, and the whole body cavity was like just filled with milky liquid, and you could see where the oviduct had basically just shredded.
Damn.
So I did lose that was, to my memory, that's the only female I ever lost in the actual middle of ovulation.
Wow.
I don't ever really remember losing females like so much during active breeding, as you would get several seasons out of a female and then they would just seem to go downhill at a certain age. You know, it was, to me, it was rare to get a female to go more than 10 or 12 years. They just would lose body tone, and you would obviously say, well, I'm not going to breed this animal anymore. She's just not of a, you know, body weight and body tone to be able to handle it. You kind of put them in retirement, and then eventually, you know, they'd pass. But the rigors of breeding never really seemed to affect my females too much during the actual breeding process. Once I went to artificial incubation and got those females back on food, you know, pretty quickly after they laid their eggs.
Now, another question I have for you, Greg, as far as the breeding goes, how many times have you dabbled with pairing a male to multiple females? And if so, how many females have you paired with one male before in 1 year?
I was pretty committed to one male with one female.
Respect.
Because I was, you know, very involved with, you know, my bloodline breeding development, morph development, that if a female became gravid, I wanted to know 100% for sure which male was the male that bred her. So I didn't use multiple males. And I also didn't want to spread one male around multiple females, because it's hard enough to get a successful pair. I didn't want to spread my boys out too thin by breeding them to multiple females, like I know, you know, you can very successfully do with ball pythons, for example. So I would pretty much sit down every fall, you know, with a clipboard and a legal pad and say, okay, what are the pairs going to be for this season? And I would base that on what animals I had available that were breeding age. Obviously, I had repeat breeders every year, and then I had, you know, animals that were going to breed for the first time. Sometimes I would breed pairs together that had been successful before because I liked the results that I got. Other times I would say, okay, I'm not going to breed that pair together again because I didn't really get the desired result in the way that the babies turned out. And but I would put all my males down one side of the column, all my females down the other side, and then just start drawing lines and say, okay, this is how I'm going to pair them up. Now, I would obviously make an exception if I had a really nice male that I wanted to definitely successfully breed, and the first female that I pair him up with, you know, I got no copulations at all. There was no interest, or maybe even I got an adversarial reaction from one or both of them. Yeah, I wouldn't hesitate to use that male on a different female, you know, as the breeding season progressed. But those were exceptions, and for the most part, I tried to stick to my plan.
And then also another question I had too, relating to the breeding, you know, because with ball pythons, right, there's people who just look at the weight of the snake and say, all right, well, you're that big, and I think you can go, right?
Right.
With your approach with the chondros, right, like, you know, did you base things off how big the snake was? Would you go off age? If so, like, what was like the youngest age of a chondro you would breed a chondro at?
Yeah, I typically didn't want to push females early. So again, if memory serves, I think 3 years and 1,000 grams was like the starting point for a female for the first time. I don't think I ever bred a female younger than 3 years of age.
Right. Okay. Now, with that being said, I'm curious because there are certain localities that are just like never coming into these states, I feel like, ever again. And I'm talking about, I don't know if they're localities, I could be wrong, but the canary, you know, the canary line.
Right.
Kofiau, right? There's not too many real Kofiaus, because Kofiau should be a high yellow snake. Am I right? A real Kofiau should be high yellow, or am I wrong?
Well, that was the hope, you know, when they were first imported. You know, they caused a lot of stir, and there was a lot of controversy because people were trying to import them and sell them before as young high yellow animals before we really knew whether they were going to hold the color or not. And I never worked with them myself, but I've talked to a good handful of people over the years that have. And the general consensus seems to be that you can have one of those animals just turn green like overnight, even like as a several-year-old adult. So it seems to be kind of a mysterious thing with them and hit and miss on the coloration.
I mean, even with a neonate, right? Or even with overall with your chondros that you've raised up. I mean, do they ever stop changing? I mean, for the most part, I feel like there's even a period as they hit maturity, their tone, their coloration changes from what I've seen.
Some do and some don't. Probably the most notable. What's that?
The good ones do.
Probably the most notable change is females that turn what we call hormonal blue. Many females will turn a bluish color during their first breeding season, then go back to mostly green, and then they'll turn blue again during their second breeding season, and sometimes they'll retain that blue coloration for the rest of their lives. I found with high yellow animals, generally once they stabilized in their color change, they pretty much stayed that way for the remainder of their mature lives. The calico animals that I had raised all seemed to be pretty stable once they got through with their change, but some animals change fast and some animals take a really long time to change. So you can't get too excited early in the color change process because animals can look spectacular for a few months and then go on to look much more normal as an adult. And then other animals just seem to change very rapidly and maintain that coloration for, their adult lives.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like sometimes for the most part, you just never know, you'll know when you know as time goes.
Right. Right.
Which I think is awesome. Okay. So I have a question for you as far as, kind of going back to your days, your times vending at shows, because shout out to Rico, rest in peace, Rico Wilder. But I've heard stories about his setups and the way his displays were at shows. And I'm not against doing shows, but I just know how much stress I would come with. And I do know the day I would ever want to be set up at a show is when I could display, even though I probably wouldn't want to do that nowadays with all the stuff that's in the air. But like, I would like to have a display full of chondros, just to show off. Right. And I do have a picture of you in your book with you at a show in 1998, displaying some of your chondros. And how long did you keep vending going for? Like, throughout your whole career, or was there times where you did it and then you wouldn't do it? I mean, how are you approaching the vending?
Yeah, I think that shot in 98 might have been the last time that I actually did shows with live chondros. Wow. I just really wanted to avoid the stress of packing them, traveling with them, putting them on display at a show. You don't have great temperature control at a show. I just really wanted to avoid that. And the internet and chat rooms and discussion forums and all that were really exploding in popularity at the time I was breeding chondros. And so I developed a really successful model for myself by doing almost exclusively online marketing through my website. And that worked really well for me. I sold everything I could produce that way and didn't really need to do the shows. And frankly, I had done so many reptile shows with Cage Master that I had no great love of traveling to dozens of reptile shows anymore. So it's work. I would go to a couple of big ones every year just to meet people. And then after my books came out, people wanted me to do book signings and stuff. So I started doing them more for the books, but not really so much with the live animals.
That's awesome. I mean, and that's why I was like, I feel like the stress has to hit you at some point where you're just like, you know what? It's not really worth me bringing this hard-earned production to a show where a lot of things could go wrong, especially nowadays how packed shows can be. People have gotten stuff stolen off their tables, and just like the fact that you could just walk into a show and leave with mites all over your damn shirt and you don't even know it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So you got to just be careful. And I do hope one day I could vend, but I could tell you right now, it's not going to be anytime soon. And it's going to be probably the cleanest show I could possibly find if I do that. But I don't know. As far as relationship building goes, how many of the, just people that you've kind of leaned on for advice and whatnot, how many of those people did you actually meet at shows? Did you meet any of those people at shows?
Well, I originally met Trooper at a show, as I
Right.
mentioned, in 1993 in Orlando. But yeah, I've developed many great friends and long-lasting relationships at shows. So shows are great for the social end of the spectrum. And I think for more sturdy species, like a lot of colubrids and the ball pythons, obviously, they don't seem
Right.
to suffer from being displayed at shows. But chondros are delicate animals, and I just preferred not to expose mine to all that if at all possible.
So there's a breeder I want to bring up that's in your book, and I feel like there's this people in Europe that just have things down that are just really good at what they do. You know what I'm saying? And you have one guy in Russia, Vladimir. I've heard about this Vladimir guy before. What's your relationship to Vladimir as far as other than what's in the book? But like, what do you know about this Vladimir guy?
Really not a whole lot, to be honest with you. I corresponded with him, some, and but not a real depth of relationship there, honestly.
My biggest curiosity behind that is I'm just noticing in your book the way his cages were. Like he had things like in cartons, like it looked like plastic.
Oh, okay. I know who you're talking about now. He was the primary caregiver at the facility in Indonesia for
Okay.
The name's escaping me now, but the big importer that everybody really looked to for quality farmed animals, Cameron. Bushmaster, yeah. So my understanding is that Vladimir is actually passed away not too long after my books came out.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. All right.
But I never actually corresponded with him. I had him confused with somebody else that I had talked to.
So these right here, this is in Indonesia. This is why there's probably no heat because they're just,
right.
They're just completely ambient.
Right.
Oh
yeah, that's Bushmaster's facility.
I will say, do you know who David Bram is? Specialty Design. He has like 3D perches that he designs and whatnot. Do you know who that is?
Yes.
I would say, man, he's definitely changed the game big time because he came out with those, like that basically a system where you could input windows, add like the trackers and everything into the side of a tub, and you basically make a tub basically like a little mini 2x2 or something,
right?
Kind of like what you see here. You know what I'm saying? But what's crazy is like, if your temps in the rooms, everything's right. I mean, these chondros, they could go with the most simplest setup and thrive perfectly. You know what I'm saying? Like,
exactly.
And that's why I love about them, and yeah, you could go the route of putting a bunch of bushes in there if you want, but why? Like, I love seeing a chondro just so healthy, like, seeing its the definition of the scalation definition and all that stuff. Like, really admire how a chondro could look if you just keep it simple and hydrated. And
right.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay, now listen, I have a question for you as far as your kind of traveling. Like, did you ever kind of do traveling as far as go look at chondros in the wild at all, or do anything like that, Gary? Or Gary, excuse me, Gary's not here. Greg.
Yeah, I was not actually successful at it, but I did a speaking tour and book signing in Australia.
Nice.
I think it was in 2007, and I was in, I'm going to pronounce it the way the Australians pronounce it, Melbourne. Funny story. Just real quick, I was in the airport getting ready to fly from Melbourne up to Sydney, and there was a big thunderstorm that completely shut down the tarmac, and so everybody was just sitting around waiting for the tarmac to open back up and flights to resume. And a really nice young Australian girl came and sat down next to me, and she was wearing workout clothes, and she said she was an instructor at a nearby gym, and asked me, you know, what I was doing. I said, well, I'm an American. I'm here to talk about green tree pythons. And she said, oh, what cities have you visited? And I said, well, I first came to Melbourne, and now I'm on my way to Sydney. And she was like, oh, Melbourne. And I said, what's so funny? And she said, it's Melbourne. So they don't pronounce their R's. So Melbourne is Melbourne, and Cairns is pronounced Cairns. So I was at Melbourne, Sydney, and Cairns. And when I was in Cairns, there's an American, or was, I don't know if he's still there or not, but an older guy hosted me for 3 days up very close to the northern part of Australia. And we took a trip to Chondro country in the Cape York area, but we were not actually able to observe any wild chondros. But I did get to see the habitat.
Crazy. I mean, you got to think now how crazy, how differently things are nowadays. You know, I mean, I don't want to get too wrapped into this, but I mean, what's your stand with chondros being imported? I mean, do you feel like they should still continue to be imported, or do you feel like they're better off not being imported?
I would have to say, you know, as a pretty general rule, I don't see a reason to import chondros, because we have so many captive bred established, you know, bloodlines. There's plenty of people that have the potential to produce domestic animals. On the other hand, you know, I definitely can understand the desire to replenish captive bred lines with wild blood, especially people that are looking for specific race or locality animals. Right. I would just say, if we're going to import them, you know, let's try to do it as responsibly as we can. You know, support importers that appear to take good care of the animals. You know, let's not buy from people that have a great big tub full of half dead chondros with mites all over them. You know, don't support that kind of importation.
I agree.
You know, there's a place for it, but you know, again, imported animals by and large are not for beginners. They should be kept by experienced keepers for specific reasons, in my opinion.
All right. Well, listen, I don't want to lose anybody on this, but I mean, let's talk about what's happening for you nowadays, Greg. Like, what is happening in Greg Maxwell Reptiles projects nowadays? Let's talk about it, man.
Sure. Well, when we moved to Kansas City, we really downsized, and I was extremely busy with my guitar business out there. That was one of the reasons I moved out there. There's a huge population of musicians out there, and I was really super busy, had no animals out there really at all, and no room for them. And then when my wife and I relocated back here to Central Ohio in 2017, we downsized again. So I have a relatively small house without any real area for reptiles. I don't have a basement. We have a ranch house on a slab. You know, my wife has been extremely patient and gracious to me over the years and indulged many of my business ideas and hobbies, but she's not a reptile person and really doesn't want snakes in the house. So reptiles in the house is not an option for me at this point. So the only other option I have is here in my guitar shop. And this is a separate building from my house. It's a 20-foot by 40-foot building, heated and cooled. It'd be a fantastic reptile building, but it's a guitar shop right now.
Right.
So I do have a small finished area upstairs that used to be a recording studio. And the real talent in my family is my daughter, who now lives in Alaska. And we don't get to record or do much together anymore. And the studio really wasn't being used hardly at all. And I thought, if I'm going to be able to do anything with animals again, that's the only space I have for now. So a few months ago, last fall actually, I decided to put the recording stuff into storage and revamp that room and turn it into a reptile room. And I'm currently building a small breeding collection of ball pythons and really enjoying them, working with a handful of pied morphs and also some asphalt and freeway animals, which I really like. And people ask me constantly, are you going to get back into chondros? And I would love to do some chondros again, but that probably won't be possible until I fully retire from guitar repair and building. And at that point, I have plans to refurbish some of this area that I'm sitting in for a bigger reptile area. And I'll have room for some arboreal cages. The room upstairs right now where my ball pythons are has vaulted ceilings. So you can't stand straight up in the room, except in the middle of the room. When you get closer to the walls, the ceilings slope in. And I just don't have any room for arboreal cages. So I'm overjoyed and excited to be back to keeping some live reptiles again, looking to generate some retirement income from the ball pythons. And be able to get into some other species that I just enjoy. I want to do some Okie corns, which have always been a favorite of mine. I have a little pair of Trans-Pecos rat snakes right now that I got.
Nice.
But for the most part, I'm sticking with the ball pythons until I'm able to move everything into a bigger area.
I'm excited for you. You have no idea, because for me to be such a, foundation built off the ball pythons, but obsessed with the green trees, I have a guy here who's built a green tree python foundation, but now getting into the balls. And I feel like the ball pythons and green tree community are going back and forth as far as either one's been in chondros wanting to get into ball pythons, or one's been in ball pythons wanting to get into chondros. Do you know who Justin Kabelka is, the biggest ball python breeder?
Just got to meet him at Tinley.
Respect to the homie Justin Kabelka, a good friend of mine, but also was at Bill Stiegel's house and got his first chondro from Bill Stiegel. Can you believe it? He's in the chondro game.
Yep, I just was able to meet him at Tinley, and I'm actually getting ready to send him an autographed copy of my book. They were out of them at the show, so I couldn't give him one there, but I promised I'd send him one. And I've run into a lot of old chondro people who are doing balls now, and I know vice versa too.
This just means, because if it's one thing I'm looking forward to this year is my pied game, and if you don't think I'm sending you something this year, you must be smoking something, mister, because I'm gonna send you something. I'm gonna send you some crazy heating ass pied ball pythons. I'll tell you that, my man.
Oh, I'd be honored, man. I really would.
Okay, listen, I have a wrap-up question for you before we get into the hot seat questions. Greg, now let's just put yourself in 1993, body, mindset, everything. Whew. Let's say we went back to 1993, but we're in 2022. All right, that means you've never bred any chondros. You're just now getting into it. If that was you right now, what would you do differently than you did before?
I think I would be a little less rigid on trying to do everything exactly the same way that my mentors did. Maybe be a little more open to experimenting with different husbandry techniques and different incubation techniques. I think one of the main things I would do differently, because I've had other people ask me kind of the same question, is I think I would probably go more in the direction of heating and humidifying my entire room rather than spraying the individual cages quite so much. For one reason, it'd be a lot less labor intensive. And I just have always felt, like maybe if I went in that direction, it would been interesting to see how the animals responded. And to that, but I probably would tend to go more in that direction as far as husbandry technique. Those are the main things, that I've thought about. A lot of it I would want to do exactly the same. I'd want to promote captive breeding and quality information and have a great website and do great photography. Those are things, that I think are universal.
I mean, I'm so sorry I lied. That's not the wrap-up question because a couple more popped in my head. Emeralds, emerald tree boas. Has that ever crossed your mind to keep or take a stab at? I mean, not physically, but just mentally,
Oh yeah. Interestingly you would ask me that, because I actually owned emeralds before I owned chondros.
Northerns?
I got a pair of northerns. They were my first arboreals that I ever had.
Wow.
And promptly began to regurge on me.
Oh, geez. Warren Booth is going to love this one. Woo.
And I had not met Trooper face to face, but I knew that he did both chondros and emeralds at the zoo in Washington. And somebody gave me his contact information, and I wrote an email to him and said, hey, Trooper, my name is Greg. I've got this pair of emeralds and I cannot keep food down in them. What should I do? And you know what he told me? Burn them.
Wow. Oh my Lanta.
And
Jesus. Burn them.
So I hope that doesn't shock anybody, but I really have no idea about regurgitation syndrome now in emeralds, or if there's treatment.
Greg,
but back in those days,
now we say free. Greg, now we say freeze them.
Freeze them. Okay. That's probably really what he meant. But I wanted to have nothing to do with arboreal green snakes after that. And it took Trooper quite a while, actually, of talking to me at that first show where I met him to convince me that captive-bred, correctly cared for animals were actually pretty easy to keep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just telling you, if you want to talk about less headache and less experience with terrible experiences, go with a captive born and bred animal. But I mean, I don't know. I just feel like even a captive born and bred animal, I mean, and I know this from experience from people in my own circle who gone from ball pythons to chondros. And you got to understand, there's some people that have gone away with certain stuff like, temperature spikes and drops that that a ball python could live through and go through. But, if you do that to a baby neonate, and I'm talking about like drastic drops, some of those go in a state of shock and don't bounce back, no matter what, no matter if they're captive born and bred or not. So that's the thing. Like it's, just because it's captive born and bred doesn't mean you're 100% meant to keep the animal. Some people can't even keep the captive born and bred alive. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
And that's why I want, to really wrap this up before we get into the hot seat questions. I mean, if somebody out there is listening to this right now, Greg, and they're really wanting to get a chondro, but they're at that position that we were talking earlier where, hell, man, I can't afford a $2,000 chondro. But I am seeing some of this stuff available that seems to be okay. I mean, at this point, would you say to anyone who's willing to take the risk to take the gamble, or would you just say, no, just wait until you could afford a United States captive border bred? What would your final say on that be?
Well, I've been out of the loop and out of the market, for a dozen years or so. So I'm not really up on everything that's available, but even when I was breeding really high-end expensive morphs, you could still find domestically produced babies for $500 or $600. I don't know if you still can do that anymore, but if you can, no, okay. Yeah, I would say, if you're faced with the decision in your life, whether it's buy a well-established import from a reputable seller versus never being able to have any chondros because you can't afford the more expensive animals, then do your homework, set up a good environment, know what you're getting into, and, go for it. Now, I hesitate to say that because I don't want everybody to go, yeah, Greg Maxwell said it's okay to go out and, everybody buy imports. But, I would hate for somebody to not be able to work with these wonderful animals just because they're not in a financial situation to ever be able to do it.
Yeah, and that's how I see it too. But I mean, at the end of the day, Greg, how many imports have you added to your collection throughout your life?
The only imports that I specifically remember were the pair of Arus that I got, and they successfully produced for me one time, and neither animal survived for a really long time after that. And that's been most of the experience that I've heard from other people, that you're doing really, really good to get one successful breeding out of an import female.
No, I mean, with that being said, do you have tabs on the majority of the females and powerful males that you let go of? Like, do you still know where a lot of these are, or do you unfortunately don't know where any of these are?
I really don't know where a lot of them are. Every once in a while, I have people on Instagram that'll send me photographs of a calico line animal, or, hey, this is a third or fourth generation from one of your animals. And it's always really a great thing for me to, see animals from some of my bloodlines still going. But unfortunately, again, like my cage business, and I really don't want to get into the details because it's painful and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but my animals did not end up getting worked with the way that I was told they would be and that I had hoped that they would be. So yeah, some of them made it into collections, and people are still working with the bloodlines, others not so much. But no, I haven't really kept specific track of much of it.
Well, you want to know a funny story? I mean, it's not really funny, but to me, it's like I'll hold this close to my heart just because I was able and lucky enough to say that I had 1-year animals in my collection. That
Sweet.
Was from 19 years old. It was a male. I'm trying to look to where the paperwork's at because I have it somewhere. But I got this animal that you produced in 2005. And I'll never forget. I have him on my page. I'm looking for him right now, but he was probably one of the most coolest looking fucking animals I've ever seen. Just the green coloration and the yellow he reminded me of a, and if I could find it, I'll show you, but he reminded me of a basin. Didn't even look like a chondro. He looked like a damn basin. But he had this thing where he couldn't perch fully. Like half of his lower half would hang a lot. And like he had he ended up passing away from it because I guess him passing food just ended up becoming harder and harder. But I wanted to ask you, I mean, have you ever experienced having a chondro that you raise up just not perching right, or perching like hanging and having some weird of like a weird buildup towards a weird part of their body or anything like that? Like, have you experienced any of that before?
Yeah. Chondros can have a tendency to become obese if they're overfed or if they're fed excessively large meals. And I did observe in some of my animals the habit of tail hanging if they would become constipated. And I think also they have a tendency maybe to do that if the cage environment doesn't encourage them to be active. I think they lose muscle tone sometimes if they never move and just sit in one spot all the time. So decreasing the food animal size and feeding frequency to keep them certainly not skinny, but a little more on the lean side as opposed to a little more on the obese side, I think helps prevent that.
Okay. And then do you mostly kept your males on rodents, on rats, or would you feed them mice? Like, what was your preference on that?
I fed all of my adults on rats of appropriate size. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but anytime I tried to feed a gravid mouse to an adult female, they would throw them back up. Sometimes I would, feed them a gravid mouse thinking, they're getting all the extra nutrition from the pinkies as well as the mom, And 2 or 3 times I did that and they regurged, and I don't know what it was, but I stopped doing it. But yeah, I would start the baby chondros off on mice, and then as soon as they were big enough to switch over to rat pups, I would get them on that, and then small rats when they were adults. Can you hear me? You're froze up again on my screen.
Epic. Well, Greg, what an amazing episode. 3 hours of straight heat. How do you feel? You feel okay?
Feel great. Yeah. It's been a pleasure.
You might want to do I sound okay? Can you still hear me? Am I good?
I can hear you. It's dragging a little bit, but I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to go ahead and get these hot seat questions, and then you're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap up this episode. Again, thank you again. This has been amazing, but let's get these hot seat questions ready to rock and roll for you. Ready for these, Greg?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Hot seat questions for Greg Maxwell, Reptiles, coming in hot. Frozen thought or live?
Frozen thought.
To soak a frozen thawed rodent or to not soak a frozen thawed rodent?
I always soaked mine.
Oh, you're disgusting. I'm just kidding. A cut or no cut?
I always cut my eggs.
Red Chondro Neo or yellow Chondro Neo?
Red.
Favorite locality if you had to pick one?
Aru.
Pre-first shed meal or post-first shed meal?
Post.
On any reptile, period. Yay imports or boo imports?
Generally boo.
Okay, one reptile you could import if you wanted to right now. Like, let's just say laws were good, doesn't matter, import whatever you want. What would you import if you could right now?
Speckled racers from Mexico.
Respect. What's one reptile we should never import ever again?
Oh gosh, Burmese pythons.
Amen. Let's see. Baseball or football?
Football.
Favorite football team?
Ohio State Buckeyes.
Okay, damn, we're going college. Respect. Steak or fish?
Boy, I like both, but I'm a big salmon fan.
So you're gonna go fish. If you had to pick one or the other,
Yep.
let's say God can't. Okay, so we're going salmon. Awesome.
Got to go fish.
Okay, perfect. Yay alcohol or boo alcohol?
Alcohol in moderation. I love craft beer.
Craft beer. Okay, so your choice of alcohol beverage would be a craft beer.
Yes.
IPA, sour. What are we talking?
Dark.
Dark. Oh, stouts.
Yeah.
You're a stout guy. I'm gonna send you something. Not to get off the hot seat questions, but my cousin owns a brewery, really nice one here in El Cajon, which is right where I live, and he has amazing stouts. I think I'm gonna send you a pack of stouts, so be ready for that.
Appreciate it.
Van Halen or Sammy Hagar?
Van Halen.
Yes, thank you. West Coast rap or East Coast rap if you had to pick?
West.
Nice. Favorite West Coast rapper of all time?
I'm not really into it enough to know the names, to be honest with you.
Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem.
I
didn't expect you to. Honestly, I'm happy you just said West Coast. We'll just continue on. Okay, little word association. First thing that came to mind: substrate.
Newspaper.
Milk.
2%.
Stuck shed.
Bath towel.
Mites.
Provenomite.
Ovulation.
Good.
Runner.
Assist feed.
First time chondro breeder.
Patience.
And last but not least, what is your thoughts when somebody tells you they're going to be rich off breeding chondros?
Probably not going to be. But go for it.
Oh, go for it. He says, hey, Greg, you're the man. I could tell you, I mean, if you're cool with it, I'm definitely going to have you back on this show. I mean, I feel like I could definitely go another 3 hours, but I don't want to take up that much more of your night. I do got to say I had well over 80 people at one point in this show watching you. We have well over 90 likes. You had a lot of people in here excited for you to be here, Greg. So what do you have to say to all your supporters, everyone who's been basically living off your book to keep their passion going with chondros? What do you have to say to all of us out there?
Hey, I appreciate you all. Love you all. It's just a great honor of my lifetime to make any kind of a contribution at all to the community, and really grateful for the feedback and the support I've gotten for the book and for the animals that I produced, and really appreciate you having me on to your podcast. Really
Definitely.
appreciate it.
So you're saying you're cool to come back on for round 2?
Absolutely.
All right. Greg, listen, you will probably be hounded by a lot of other people who do podcasts. Listen, you're in a contract. You can't do their podcasts, unfortunately. You're locked in. You're locked in with me for the next 12 months. I'm just kidding. No, Greg, thank you so much. I'm telling you right now, this has been an honor. I am so excited. This will be a podcast I'm going to be replaying myself multiple times. So enjoy the rest of your night. I will be talking to you soon. Like I said, craft beer and a nice pied combo coming from your boy this year. Just expect that, okay?
Thank you, man. Really appreciate it.
All right, Greg Maxwell, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good night, Greg. Thank you, man.
See ya.
Epic. What a freaking G. God, thank you guys so much. Everyone who hung out all 3 hours, you guys are real ones. You guys are dedicated to this. I love it. Before you guys dip out, make sure you hit the like button if you happen to catch the end of this and you forgot to like. It's never too late to hit the like for my man Greg. And yeah, what an episode. I appreciate this so much, guys. Again, I mean, I'm just lost for words. I really think that was an amazing episode. There's so much knowledge, so much experience dropped on this 3-hour episode. So anyways, I appreciate you guys. I'll catch you guys next time. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And yeah, just be ready next time for another sick ass trap talk with MJ. Your boy's out. Have a good night, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.